Laudanum never announces itself as danger, it introduces itself as kindness, a gentle grip, just as the title promises, closing softly around a Victorian mother's weary nerves while the world applauds her composure. It is measured in drops, administered in silence, and wrapped in the language of care, relief, not ruin, medicine, not vice. At least, that is how it begins. The house is quiet now. Children finally asleep, lamps turned low, the body aches in ways no one has time to name. Grief lingers without permission. Exhaustion is treated as a moral failing. And so the bottle is reached for, not in desperation, but in routine. A trusted companion among teacups and remedies, endorsed by doctors, shielded by respectability. What it offers is not escape, but softening. The blunting of sharp thoughts, the easing of pain that society insists must be carried without complaint. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and stay with me. These stories move slowly, carefully, like the century that shaped them. And tell me where you're listening from tonight, or what hour has found you here. This channel is built for those quiet moments history rarely records. This is not a tale of scandal or sudden collapse. It is the story of dependency that learned to behave, of motherhood preserved on the surface while eroding underneath, of how care, obligation, and opium became inseparable until the gentle grip was no longer gentle at all. This is Laudanum's gentle grip, the Victorian mother's quiet addiction. The bottle does not look out of place. That is its great mercy and its great danger. It stands quietly on the sideboard, its brown glass catching the lamplight without drawing attention. Nestled among china cups, a sugar bowl with a chipped rim, a spoon dulled by years of stirring. Nothing about it announces urgency. Nothing suggests success. It is not hidden. It does not need to be. In the Victorian home, order is a language spoken fluently by objects. Everything has its proper place, and the presence of this bottle suggests propriety rather than concern. Laudanum arrives wrapped in trust, dispensed by chemists, endorsed by doctors, prescribed in measured drops. It is not introduced as escape, but as assistance, a companion to endurance, a small aid to help a woman remain exactly what she is expected to be. The mother moves through the room with practiced quiet. Her day has already been long before it officially ends. Meals prepared, faces cleaned, tempers soothed, lessons overseen, expectations met without ceremony. Her body carries the residue of years rather than hours' childbirth that never fully receded, nights fractured by crying, a fatigue that no afternoon rest ever truly resolves. None of this is considered remarkable. None of it is meant to be spoken aloud. Pain, in this house, is not dramatic. It hums. It lingers behind the eyes, settles into the lower back, tightens the chest without warning. It is the sort of pain that invites instruction rather than sympathy. Be patient, be grateful, be quiet. And so when the bottle is reached for, it feels less like indulgence than compliance. A way of correcting oneself. She pours tea first. The ritual matters. Steam rises, reassuring, domestic. The cup is held steadily, though her hand aches as it does every evening. Only after the tea is prepared does she unstopper the bottle. The scent is faint, medicinal, oddly sweet. She does not inhale deeply. She does not linger. The drops fall with precision, counted carefully, just as the doctor instructed. Always as directed. Always responsibly. The laudanum slips into the tea unnoticed. That is the point. No burning throat, no obvious intoxication, just a gradual easing, a soft loosening of the body's constant vigilance. The sharpness of the day blunts, the edges smooth, the room feels slightly farther away, as if wrapped in cotton. She can breathe without effort now. She can sit without bracing herself against discomfort. She can smile without forcing it. Nothing about this moment suggests addiction. There is no craving in the modern sense, no frantic need. There is only relief, clean, sanctioned, earned through labor and restraint. The bottle has been invited into the home because it behaves, because it does not disrupt dinner or embarrass guests, because it allows a woman to continue fulfilling her role without visible collapse. Others in the house may notice the calm. They may comment on her improved spirits, her composure, her ability to manage despite everything. No one asks what has changed. Improvement is assumed to be moral rather than chemical, a sign of strength, a sign that she has learned, finally, how to carry her burdens properly. The bottle remains on the sideboard as the evening settles. It will be there tomorrow, and the day after that. It does not rush. It does not insist. It waits, confident in its place among the respectable objects of the home. It knows it will be needed again, not because the woman is weak, but because the world has no intention of growing gentler. This is how laudanum enters a life. Not as a scandal, not as a fall, but as an adjustment, a correction, a quiet presence among teacups and spoons, promising nothing more than the ability to endure what was never meant to be endured alone. Laudanum is never introduced as temptation. It is introduced as sense, as prudence. As a modern answer to ancient inconveniences, the female body is expected to endure with grace. The word itself carries authority, Latin syllables softened into familiarity, rendered harmless by repetition in medical journals and household guides. It is spoken calmly by men in dark coats, written neatly on slips of paper measured with droppers rather than indulgence. A remedy. That distinction matters. In Victorian England, the boundary between medicine and morality is carefully guarded. Illness excuses weakness. Vice does not. Laudanum is permitted to cross the threshold because it wears the uniform of care. It is sold openly, advertised respectfully, recommended for ailments so broad they become a mirror in which nearly every woman can recognize herself: nerves, melancholy, menstrual pain, exhaustion, restlessness, grief. It is not positioned as escape from life, but as a way to remain present within it. The doctor speaks of balance, of calming the system, of restoring order to an overtaxed constitution. He does not ask many questions. He does not linger on duration. He does not warn of habit, because habit implies choice, and choice implies fault. Instead, he reassures. This will help you sleep. This will steady you. This will allow you to function. His voice is steady, professional, uninterested in drama. There is no reason to doubt him. And why would there be? The Victorian era trusts its remedies. Progress is believed to be cumulative. Science is framed as benevolent, advancing steadily toward comfort and control. Opium has a long pedigree used for centuries, refined now into something respectable. Laudanum is simply the modern iteration, purified and civilized. Its dangers are discussed quietly, if at all, and usually in reference to the poor, the undisciplined, the morally suspect, not women like her. In this framing, taking laudanum is not indulgence, it is compliance. It is participation in modern life. A woman who accepts the prescription demonstrates responsibility, acknowledging her limitations while still fulfilling her duties. She is not shirking pain. She is managing it. She is not numbing herself. She is correcting an imbalance. The language makes it so. Even the dosage reinforces virtue. Drops, not gulps. Precision, not excess. The ritual itself feels orderly, almost moral, counted carefully, taken at the appropriate hour, recorded, sometimes, in the margins of household notebooks alongside menus and chores. There is comfort in the structure, comfort in knowing that relief has rules. Society reinforces this distinction with enthusiasm. A woman who drinks openly is suspect. A woman who medicates discreetly is praised. Laudanum allows suffering to be concealed without being denied. It preserves appearances. It ensures that domestic harmony remains intact. Husbands notice fewer complaints. Children encounter fewer tears. Guests observe composure rather than strain. The remedy is working. Everyone agrees. What goes unexamined is the cost of that success. The absence of visible pain is mistaken for health. The suppression of emotion is interpreted as resilience. Laudanum does not remove the source of suffering, it simply muffles its expression. But this distinction is inconvenient, and inconvenience is something the Victorian household prefers not to acknowledge. There is also the quiet comfort of permission. So many forms of relief are denied to women outright: rest, autonomy, complaint. Laudanum, however, is allowed, encouraged even. It comes with approval already attached. To refuse it would be unreasonable. To question it would appear ungrateful. And so the drops are taken without conflict, without internal debate. In this way, laudanum secures its place not through force, but through logic, through language, through trust. It is framed as aid, not indulgence, as medicine, not escape. And because of this, it slips past the moral defenses entirely. No alarms are raised, no boundaries crossed, at least, none that can be easily named. This is the foundation upon which dependency is built. Not desire, but permission. Not excess, but reassurance. Laudanum does not ask to be wanted. It asks only to be accepted. And in a world that offers women so little relief, acceptance comes easily. The doctor does not arrive as an authority to be questioned. He arrives as certainty itself. His coat is dark, his manner restrained, his voice trained to sound calm even when knowledge is thin. He carries with him the confidence of his profession, and more importantly, the permission of society to speak without challenge. When he reassures, reassurance becomes fact. He listens briefly. He nods at the right moments. He does not linger on details that cannot be neatly resolved. Women's ailments, after all, are considered familiar territory, unpleasant, but expected, cyclical, inherent. There is little curiosity in his examination, only recognition, headaches, nervous agitation, sleeplessness, a vague sense of dread that arrives without reason. He has heard this before. He has written the same answer many times. Laudanum is produced not as an experiment, but as a solution already proven. He speaks of it casually, almost kindly, as one might recommend a stronger tea or a warmer shawl. It will soothe the nerves. It will encourage rest. It will take the edge off pain that need not be endured quite so sharply. His tone carries no warning, because warning would imply risk, and risk would demand responsibility. The bottle he prescribes is modest. The label is precise. The instructions are brief but confident. A few drops, once or twice daily. Increase slightly if needed. He does not specify what needed might look like. He assumes discretion. He assumes restraint. After all, the patient before him is respectable. A wife, a mother, a woman accustomed to self-denial. Excess is not expected of her. There is comfort in this interaction. To be seen, even partially, is a relief. To have discomfort acknowledged without requiring explanation feels generous. The doctor does not doubt her pain. He does not accuse her of exaggeration. He does not suggest hysteria outright, though the word hovers unspoken in the room. Instead, he offers a substance that promises order, a way to quiet the body without disrupting the household. What he does not offer is time. He does not suggest rest beyond what is immediately practical. He does not question the conditions that have produced her exhaustion. Those matters lie outside his jurisdiction. His role is to return her to function, not to reconsider the demands placed upon her. And laudanum performs this task efficiently. The medical journals of the era echo his confidence. Opium is discussed as a marvel, versatile, effective, adaptable. Its dangers are acknowledged in passing, usually in relation to those who lack discipline. The poor, the idle, the morally compromised Rarely the middle-class mother, whose suffering is wrapped in obligation rather than indulgence. The distinction is reassuring. It places safety on the side of character rather than chemistry. So when the dosage increases slightly, no alarm sounds. Bodies change. Tolerance is not yet a word used with urgency. If relief shortens, the answer seems obvious: adjust the amount. This is framed as responsiveness, not escalation. The doctor may note the change or he may not. Either way, he remains unconcerned. The patient is still upright, still composed, still fulfilling her role. There is also convenience in reassurance. To question laudanum too closely would require alternatives, and alternatives are scarce. Pain without remedy is unacceptable, but rest without productivity is equally so. The doctor, like the society that shaped him, seeks balance rather than resolution. Laudanum provides balance. It smooths symptoms without demanding change. Over time, the visits become briefer. The trust established early allows for efficiency later. Prescriptions are renewed with minimal discussion. The doctor's confidence has done its work. The patient no longer needs convincing. She has learned the language of relief. She knows what to say, how to describe her discomfort in ways that align with expected outcomes. And so the reassurance continues, quietly reinforcing the arrangement. Laudanum remains a medicine because it is treated as one. Dependency remains invisible because it does not disrupt order. The doctor leaves, satisfied that he has helped. The household returns to its routines, and the bottle stays where it has always been approved, unquestioned, and steadily indispensable. Pain exists in the Victorian home without vocabulary. It is present, persistent, and quietly acknowledged, yet rarely named with precision. It is understood to be part of womanhood itself, an expected accompaniment, like breath or duty. To articulate it too clearly would invite suspicion. To dwell on it would suggest weakness. And so it is absorbed into daily life, carried without comment, expressed only in small adjustments of posture and silence. The mother learns early how to translate discomfort into acceptability. A tight smile replaces complaint. A pause at the stare becomes prudence rather than fatigue. A hand pressed briefly to the temple is explained away as the weather, the season, the hour. Language is reserved for practical matters, meals, schedules, instruction. There is little room for describing sensations that have no solution attached to them. Much of her pain is cumulative. It arrives layered rather than acute, the result of years rather than moments. Childbirth has altered her body in ways medicine acknowledges only vaguely. Recovery is assumed to be complete once the immediate danger has passed. What lingers afterward, the heaviness, the dull ache, the sense that the body never fully returned to itself, is not granted a category. It is simply the price of motherhood. There are other pains that do not announce their origin at all. A constant tension beneath the ribs, a weariness that settles behind the eyes by midday, a fluttering unease that arrives without invitation, unconnected to any visible threat. These sensations resist tidy explanation. They are not injuries. They leave no marks. They cannot be pointed to or measured. As such, they are treated with suspicion even by those who feel them. Victorian culture prefers ailments that can be named cleanly and addressed decisively. A fever, a wound, a cough with a clear cause. Pain that lacks narrative is unsettling. It demands patience rather than intervention, endurance rather than remedy. Women are expected to provide both, quietly. This absence of language creates a peculiar isolation. The mother knows she is not alone in her discomfort. She sees it mirrored in other women. In the careful way they lower themselves into chairs, in the shared pauses during conversation, but there is no shared terminology, no collective acknowledgement. To speak plainly would disrupt the fragile agreement that holds respectability together. Even within medical settings, description is constrained. When asked how she feels, She answers in generalities: tired, unwell, a bit low. The specifics remain unspoken, not because they are insignificant, but because they are too complex to fit into the expected exchange. She has learned, through repetition, which descriptions lead to solutions and which lead to dismissal. Laudanum sits firmly on the side of solutions. The remedy offers something language does not: immediate response. The body reacts even when words fail. Pain dulls, tension loosens. The internal noise quiets without requiring explanation. In this way, laudanum becomes a substitute for articulation. It resolves what cannot be named, smoothing over discomfort without demanding that it be understood. This is where its appeal deepens, not because the pain has worsened, but because it remains undefined. Each dose confirms what society has implied all along, that the problem lies within the body rather than the circumstances surrounding it. Relief becomes personal, private, contained. No one else needs to know. Over time, the mother begins to rely on the bottle not only for comfort, but for clarity. When pain is present, the solution is clear. When unease rises, the response is immediate. There is no need to search for words that might not be welcomed. The ritual speaks for her. Yet something is lost in this exchange. Pain that is never named is never examined. It is managed rather than addressed, softened rather than understood. The body becomes a site of quiet negotiation, its signals muted before they can form questions. And so the language remains absent, replaced by chemistry. In the absence of words, laudanum becomes fluent. It answers without listening. It resolves without inquiry. And in doing so, it reinforces the silence that made it necessary in the first place. Childbirth is spoken of as an event, a moment endured and survived, neatly concluded once the child draws breath and the danger passes. The room is cleaned, the linens are changed. Visitors arrive with congratulations. Society marks the occasion as complete, but the body does not agree. For many women, childbirth does not end. It recedes only enough to be overlooked. The mother carries its consequences long after the household resumes its rhythm. There are aches that never quite leave, a heaviness that settles into the hips and spine, a fatigue that feels structural rather than temporary. Nights fractured by nursing turn into years of interrupted rest. Recovery is assumed to have occurred because it is required to have occurred. There is no space for lingering weakness in a household that depends upon her continuity. Medical attention fades quickly. The doctor who visited attentively during labor does not linger in the weeks that follow. His interest is acute, not chronic. Once the immediate crisis has passed, what remains is relegated to endurance. Discomfort becomes a private matter, something to be managed rather than treated. The woman is expected to return to her duties with minimal adjustment, her body presumed restored simply because it must be. Victorian culture celebrates maternal sacrifice, but only in abstraction. The actual toll, physical, emotional, cumulative, is rarely examined. Pain is reframed as natural consequence, fatigue as proof of devotion. To complain would suggest ingratitude, a failure to appreciate the honor of motherhood. And so the mother learns to absorb what persists without protest. It is here that laudanum finds its most enduring justification, not as a response to crisis, but as maintenance. The pain it addresses is not dramatic enough to demand intervention, yet persistent enough to erode daily life. A constant reminder that the body has been altered in ways no one intends to acknowledge. Laudanum does not restore what was lost, it makes the loss tolerable. The drops are taken not in desperation, but in pragmatism. There is work to be done, children to be fed, a household to manage. The body must cooperate, regardless of its condition. Laudanum encourages that cooperation. It dulls the ache enough to allow movement. It softens the fatigue just enough to permit another day of labor. Over time, the association becomes ingrained. Childbirth pain, once acute, becomes diffuse, spreading into every part of the body's memory. Each pregnancy compounds the last. Recovery never fully resets. The remedy remains constant while the body changes around it. What was once occasional relief becomes routine support. The mother does not think of this as dependency. She thinks of it as adaptation. The world has made demands upon her body, and she has found a way to meet them. Laudanum is not an indulgence, it is a tool. One more instrument in the careful management of domestic life. Yet this framing obscures the deeper truth that childbirth for her never truly ended. It became a permanent state rather than a chapter, a before and after that never fully resolved. And laudanum, introduced to ease the transition, now bridges the gap between expectation and reality. In this way, the remedy embeds itself not as a temporary measure, but as a companion to motherhood itself. It accompanies each stage, each additional demand, each unacknowledged strain. The bottle remains close because the pain never fully leaves. And as long as childbirth is treated as a moment rather than a condition, laudanum will continue to stand in for the care that never arrived. Sleep, in the Victorian household, is treated as a reward rather than a need. It is granted to those who have earned it through proper exhaustion and denied, quietly, to those whose minds refuse to settle. A woman who lies awake is not considered ill, she is considered undisciplined. Restlessness is framed as temperament, not symptom, and so sleeplessness becomes something to correct, not to understand. The mother lies in the dark long after the house has surrendered to stillness. The children breathe evenly in their rooms. The fire has collapsed into embers. Outside, the street settles into its nocturnal hush. Yet her body remains alert, tight with vigilance, as if the day has not released its hold. Thoughts arrive, uninvited, unfinished tasks, remembered words, anticipations of tomorrow's demands. None of them feel urgent enough to justify wakefulness, yet they persist regardless. She does not speak of this in the morning. To admit sleeplessness would invite questions she cannot answer. Why were you awake? What troubled you? The honest response that nothing in particular did, and everything did, does not fit neatly into conversation. Instead, she attributes her fatigue to weather, to the season, to a child's cough during the night. Acceptable reasons, plausible causes. Victorian morality prizes self-regulation. A woman is expected to govern her body as she governs her household firmly, quietly, without complaint. Sleep is assumed to follow obedience. If it does not, the fault is internal. A failure of nerves, an excess of sensitivity, a mind insufficiently controlled. The language of moral weakness drifts easily toward the body. Doctors respond accordingly. Insomnia is rarely treated as a condition in its own right. It is a symptom of something else: nerves, excitement, emotional excess. Laudanum enters here not as sedation, but as discipline, a way to quiet the system, to instruct the body to behave. The remedy is framed as assistance in self-control, rather than as an acknowledgement of genuine distress. The first dose before bed feels like permission. Permission to stop thinking, permission to surrender consciousness without guilt. The effect is subtle but unmistakable. Muscles loosen. Thoughts lose their urgency. Sleep arrives without struggle, unearned yet welcome. Morning comes with a sense of gratitude rather than shame. She has slept. She has done what was expected. The improvement is noticed. She appears calmer, less irritable, more capable. Sleep restores not just energy, but credibility. A well-rested woman is a successful woman. The laudanum has done its work. Over time, however, the boundary between remedy and requirement blurs. Nights without it become more difficult. Sleep retreats again, sharper in its absence than it ever was before. The body remembers the ease and resists returning to struggle. This is not framed as dependence. It is framed as necessity. The remedy worked. Therefore, it must be continued. The moral language surrounding sleep intensifies the pattern. To lie awake again would feel like regression, like failure, like a return to an undisciplined state she has already corrected. The bottle becomes insurance against that judgment, external and internal alike. What remains unexamined is why sleep required intervention at all. The cumulative demands of motherhood, the unending vigilance, the absence of rest that is truly restorative, these are not addressed. Instead, their consequences are managed chemically. Laudanum does not question the system, it enforces it. In this way, sleeplessness is transformed from a signal into a flaw, and laudanum, offered as correction, becomes indispensable. Not because the night has grown more hostile, but because wakefulness has been moralized. Sleep must be achieved, and if it cannot be earned, it must be taken. Evening arrives gradually in the Victorian home, announced not by clocks but by habits. Curtains are drawn before the light fully fades. Lamps are lit in careful sequence. The day does not end abruptly, it softens. And it is in this softened hour before dusk settles completely that the drops are taken. The timing feels deliberate, though no one has ever instructed it. Too early would appear indulgent. Too late would suggest need. Before dusk is neither. It is practical. A preparation rather than a response. The household is still upright, still respectable. The children are not yet in bed. The work of the day has not fully released its grip. This is not escape. It is adjustment. The bottle is reached for, almost without thought now. The motion has become integrated into the evening routine, as natural as clearing the table or setting out bread for the morning. There is no ceremony, but there is precision. The stopper is removed carefully. The spoon is steady. The drops fall one by one, counted not out of fear, but out of habit. Control remains important. Control must always be visible. Taken before dusk, laudanum performs its quietest work. It does not overwhelm. It does not draw attention. Instead, it smooths the transition between labor and rest, blunting the day's sharp edges before they can cut into the night. The body loosens slightly. The mind releases its grip on unfinished tasks. The world becomes manageable again. This timing is not accidental. Evening is when expectations converge. Dinner must still be served. Children must still be guided toward sleep. The household must move seamlessly from activity into calm. A mother who falters here is noticed. Fatigue is least forgivable at the day's end, when composure is expected to hold firm. Laudanum ensures it does. There is reassurance in taking it early enough that no one can accuse her of needing it. The remedy precedes distress. It anticipates rather than responds. This distinction matters deeply. To need is to admit weakness. To prepare is to demonstrate responsibility. Over time, the body learns this hour. As the light shifts and the room darkens, a familiar tightness begins to rise, not from pain alone, but from expectation. The day has trained her to brace herself for the evening's demands. Laudanum meets that tension halfway, dissolving it before it can fully form. The relief feels earned, because it arrives on schedule. The ritual protects her from herself as much as from others. Without it, irritability creeps in, sounds sharpen, thoughts tangle, small interruptions feel unbearable. With it, patience returns. Movements slow, speech softens. She becomes the version of herself the household expects to encounter at this hour. What remains unseen is how subtly the evening has been restructured around those drops. The day no longer ends naturally, it must be assisted. The body no longer trusts the approach of night to bring rest on its own. Laudanum has become the hinge upon which evening turns. Yet nothing appears amiss. The dose is still modest, the timing still sensible. The bottle remains one object among many, its presence unremarkable. No one marks the moment when preparation becomes requirement. There is no clear line to cross, only a quiet adjustment, repeated often enough to disappear. And so each evening just before dusk, the drops fall again, soft, precise, unquestioned, not taken in desperation, not taken in secret, taken as part of the household's rhythm. A small chemical reassurance that the night will unfold as expected and that she will remain equal to it. The bottle's color is no accident. Brown glass does not invite scrutiny. It absorbs light rather than reflecting it, muting its contents, rendering what is inside indistinct and safe. In the Victorian home, it blends seamlessly with ink bottles, tinctures, perfumes, and preserves. It looks medicinal, useful, proper. Nothing about it suggests danger, and that, perhaps, is its most persuasive quality. Respectability depends on appearances, and Laudanum understands this instinctively. It does not disrupt the household's visual order. It does not smell of excess or announce itself with spectacle. It sits quietly on shelves and sideboards, its label neat, its script professional. A substance that looks this orderly could not possibly be a problem. Disorder, after all, is how vice reveals itself. The bottle's presence reassures not just the woman who uses it, but those around her. Husbands see a wife who manages herself. Children encounter calm rather than chaos. Guests observe composure, not strain. Laudanum does not draw attention to itself. It draws attention away from the effort required to maintain the household's equilibrium. In this way, it becomes an ally of appearances. Victorian society has little tolerance for visible female struggle. Pain may be endured, but only if it is discreet. Emotion may be felt, but only if it does not inconvenience others. Laudanum enables this discretion perfectly. It allows distress to be managed privately, chemically, without requiring acknowledgement or accommodation. The bottle becomes a tool for social compliance as much as physical relief. There is comfort in this arrangement. To rely on Laudanum does not feel transgressive because it aligns so closely with expectation. The woman who uses it is not rebelling against her role. She is fulfilling it more effectively. She is quieter, smoother, less demanding. In a culture that prizes restraint, these are virtues, not warning signs. The brown glass bottle carries authority. It suggests science, modernity, progress. It signals that care has been taken, that expertise has been consulted. This is not a homemade concoction or a desperate measure. It is purchased legally, recommended, professionally, measured carefully. Each of these elements reinforces its legitimacy, and legitimacy protects it from scrutiny. No one questions how often it is used, because its use is assumed to be rational. No one counts the bottles as they empty, because replacement is unremarkable. Laudanum is not hidden, yet it remains unseen in the ways that matter. It exists within a category that exempts it from moral accounting. The woman herself internalizes this logic. She does not think of the bottle as something she depends on, but as something she keeps, like linens, like medicines for the children, like tools required to run a household smoothly. Its presence does not provoke reflection. It reassures her that she is doing what is necessary. Yet the very qualities that make the bottle respectable also make it dangerous, because it looks proper. It escapes suspicion. Because it functions quietly, it avoids intervention. Because it is sanctioned, it is never questioned until it is indispensable. Over time, the bottle's weight becomes familiar in the hand. Its place on the shelf becomes fixed. Its absence would be noticed more sharply than its presence ever was, but still, nothing appears amiss. The household remains orderly. The woman remains composed. Society sees only success. This is how addiction hides in plain sight, not through secrecy, but through approval, not through rebellion, but through conformity. The brown glass bottle does not corrupt respectability, it perfects it. And in doing so, It ensures that no one thinks to ask whether respectability itself has become part of the problem. The calm arrives without ceremony. It settles gently, almost politely, as though mindful not to overstay its welcome. There is no rush, no sudden alteration of the senses that might provoke alarm. Instead, the world softens in small, incremental ways. Sounds lose their edge, thoughts slow their relentless pace, the body releases its constant readiness to endure. And in that release, relief is mistaken for reward. It feels earned, because suffering has preceded it. The day has been long, full, exacting. Duties have been met without complaint. Expectations have been satisfied. The calm does not arrive uninvited. It follows effort. It appears as the natural conclusion to labor well performed. In this framing, laudanum does not grant indulgence, it delivers compensation. The mother experiences this calm as a restoration of balance. Her movements grow more fluid, the tightness in her chest eases. The unspoken anxiety that lingers beneath every interaction retreats just far enough to allow presence. She can attend to her children without irritation. She can listen without impatience. She can exist without bracing herself against the next demand. Others notice the difference, though they rarely name it. Compliments come quietly. You seem well. You are managing beautifully. The household feels peaceful. These observations reinforce the internal narrative. Whatever has produced this calm must be good, must be working. The cause remains unexamined because the outcome is desirable. In Victorian morality, reward is deeply tied to discipline. Pleasure without labor is suspect. Ease without effort is indulgent. Laudanum sidesteps this judgment by aligning relief with exhaustion. It does not feel like pleasure. It feels like relief from pain already endured. This distinction allows the calm to be accepted without guilt. The sensation itself is subtle but profound. It is not happiness, exactly, nor contentment in the romantic sense. It is the absence of friction, the cessation of internal resistance. For a woman accustomed to constant vigilance, this absence feels extraordinary. The body, momentarily unburdened, interprets the calm as proof that the remedy is correct. Over time, the expectation of this calm grows. The evening feels incomplete without it. The day feels unresolved if it does not arrive. The body begins to anticipate the softening, to rely upon it as the signal that effort has ended. Without it, rest feels elusive. With it, rest feels deserved. This is how dependence disguises itself as fairness. The logic is persuasive. Pain was endured, relief follows. The sequence feels just. No one questions whether the scale itself is rigged. No one asks why the burden must be so heavy that chemical compensation feels reasonable. The calm also offers emotional cover. Grief, disappointment, resentment, these feelings do not vanish, but they lose their urgency. They recede into the background, less demanding, less sharp. The mother can coexist with them without being overwhelmed. This is framed as strength, as maturity, as emotional regulation. Laudanum appears to be helping her become a better version of herself. Yet this earned calm carries a quiet cost. Each time it arrives, it teaches the body what relief feels like. It establishes a baseline that ordinary rest cannot match. The nervous system adjusts, recalibrating its expectations. Calm without laudanum begins to feel insufficient, incomplete. Still, nothing seems amiss. The calm is gentle. The dosage remains controlled. The household thrives. From every visible angle, the arrangement is successful. The woman is not escaping her life, she is enduring it more gracefully. And so the calm continues to feel earned, even as it becomes necessary. Each evening, it arrives as both reward and reassurance, a chemical confirmation that suffering has meaning, that effort is recognized, and that relief, though borrowed, is justified. Silence, in the Victorian household, is often mistaken for stability. A woman who does not complain is assumed to be well. A household that runs smoothly is taken as evidence that nothing is amiss. Questions are reserved for visible disruptions, for moments when order breaks its surface, and because laudanum preserves order so effectively, no one thinks to ask what sustains it. The mother moves through her days with practiced composure. She rises, manages, oversees, resolves. Her voice remains even. Her expressions remain appropriate. There are no outbursts to provoke concern, no visible collapses to demand attention. Whatever strain exists is internal, and internal strain does not register as a social problem. It is simply part of the cost of being capable. Husbands notice outcomes, not processes. Meals appear, children are cared for, social obligations are met. The machinery of the household functions without interruption. From this vantage, inquiry seems unnecessary. To ask whether she is well would imply doubt, and doubt would suggest failure. Better to assume success and move on. Doctors, too, are guided by surfaces. Their measurements are crude, their time limited. If a patient remains upright, coherent, and polite, she is considered stable. The absence of complaint is interpreted as improvement. Laudanum has done its work. There is no incentive to probe further, no framework for asking whether the remedy itself has become essential. Friends observe only what is permissible to observe. Polite conversation does not accommodate questions about private endurance. There is admiration, perhaps, for her calm. Envy, even, at her apparent resilience. No one wonders what it costs, because cost is invisible when it is paid gradually. Even the woman herself learns not to ask. The arrangement works. That is its strongest defense. She can manage her days. She can sleep. She can function. To question the means would introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty threatens the fragile equilibrium she has built. Better to accept the calm than to interrogate it. Language fails here, not through absence but through omission. There are no words readily available to describe dependency that wears the mask of medicine. Addiction, as a concept, is reserved for visible excess for men in taverns, for bodies that collapse publicly. What she experiences does not fit those narratives, and so it remains unnamed. The bottle remains in its place, unchallenged. Each replacement feels routine. Each dose feels justified. There is no moment that demands reflection, no crisis that forces examination. Dependency does not announce itself with urgency. It arrives gradually, disguised as continuity. In this environment, asking questions would be disruptive. It would require acknowledging that endurance has limits, that relief carries consequences, that respectability itself may be complicit in harm. Such questions threaten the foundations of the household and the culture that sustains it, and so they are avoided. No one asks how long the remedy has been used. No one asks whether its absence would be felt. No one asks whether the calm is natural or assisted. The absence of inquiry becomes its own form of permission. This is how laudanum settles into permanence, not through secrecy, but through acceptance, not through denial, but through indifference. The quietest addictions thrive where questions are unnecessary, where surfaces remain smooth, and where no one believes there is anything to uncover. And so the days continue, unexamined and uninterrupted. The bottle remains among the teacups, the calm remains intact, and no one, not even the woman herself, thinks to ask what holds it all together. By the time the children are grown enough to notice patterns, the patterns are already fixed. The household runs not merely on schedules and labor, but on the careful management of the woman who anchors it. Her body, her moods, her expressions, these are treated as instruments that must be kept in working order. To manage the household, she must first manage herself. This management is rarely described outright. It is absorbed through expectation. A raised voice signals failure. Tears suggest loss of control. Fatigue, if visible, implies inefficiency. The household does not tolerate fluctuation well. It requires steadiness, and steadiness must be manufactured if it does not arise naturally. The mother learns this early. She learns to correct her tone before others notice it slipping. She learns to smooth irritation before it reaches her face. She learns to postpone her own needs indefinitely, packaging them into more acceptable forms: headaches, nerves, sleeplessness, conditions that can be addressed without challenging her role. Laudanum fits neatly into this logic. It becomes a method of self-regulation rather than a response to suffering. The language surrounding her use of it is telling. She does not say she needs it. She says it helps. It steadies her. It allows her to get through the day. These phrases frame the remedy as a tool rather than a crutch, an aid to performance rather than an admission of fragility. The distinction matters, especially to her. Managing the household self becomes an extension of domestic labor. Just as linens must be kept clean and meals prepared on time, her internal state must be maintained within acceptable limits. Too much emotion disrupts the atmosphere. Too little warmth suggests neglect. The balance is narrow, and laudanum makes it easier to maintain. She becomes adept at calibrating herself, a slightly heavier dose on difficult days, a measured restraint when guests are expected. The bottle offers control over variables that would otherwise remain unpredictable. In a life shaped by obligation, this control feels empowering. Others come to rely on it without knowing. Children experience a mother who is consistently calm. A husband encounters fewer conflicts, fewer signs of strain. The household adjusts its expectations upward, assuming that this level of composure is sustainable. Any deviation from it becomes more noticeable, more troubling. The standard rises quietly, without negotiation. What goes unrecognized is the cost of this internal management. Emotions are not resolved, they are moderated. Exhaustion is not relieved, it is suppressed. The self she presents becomes increasingly curated, increasingly distant from the one that feels. Laudanum smooths the transition between these selves, blurring the line until it is difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. There are moments, brief, unsettling, when she wonders who she would be without it. The thought arrives unexpectedly, usually when the bottle runs low or the evening stretches longer than expected. It is not fear that follows, but unease. The idea of facing the household unassisted feels irresponsible, even selfish. The self she manages has become necessary to everyone else. And so the management continues. Each day reinforces the arrangement. Each successful evening justifies the means. Laudanum does not remove her from her life. It binds her more tightly to it, ensuring that she remains functional, composed, and indispensable. In this way, addiction does not appear as loss of control, but as its refinement. The household self becomes a maintained object, carefully adjusted and chemically supported. And because the management is effective, no one questions the method. The house remains orderly, the woman remains steady, and the cost remains invisible, absorbed quietly into the rhythm of domestic life. There are tears the Victorian home allows, and tears it does not. The permitted kind arrive on cue at funerals, at sermons, at moments already sanctioned by custom. They fall briefly, discreetly, and are wiped away before they linger too long. The other tears, the ones that rise without invitation, without narrative, have no place at all. They are inconvenient, unnamed, best prevented. The mother learns this distinction early, often without being told. A tightening in the throat during the afternoon, a sudden pressure behind the eyes while folding linen, a wave of sadness that arrives without explanation and leaves just as quietly. These moments must be managed swiftly. There is no allowance for interruption. The house does not pause for private feeling. She discovers that emotion, like pain, must be rendered practical to be tolerated. Grief can be reframed as fatigue, loneliness as nerves, despair as a headache. The body offers symptoms the language can accept, and the language offers remedies in return. Laudanum moves easily within this exchange. It quiets what cannot be expressed and softens what cannot be justified. The tears that have no place are not dramatic. They are not attached to a single loss. They arise from accumulation, the steady pressure of years spent containing oneself, the erosion of personal space, the knowledge that one's own interior life must remain secondary. These tears do not ask to be witnessed. They ask only to be stopped. And so the bottle is reached for, not in moments of collapse, but in anticipation. A few drops before the swell becomes visible. A measured intervention to ensure that composure holds. The effect is reliable. The throat loosens. The eyes dry. The moment passes without leaving evidence behind. This intervention is interpreted as strength. Emotional regulation is praised, especially in women. To feel deeply is acceptable only if those feelings do not inconvenience others. Laudanum offers a way to meet this expectation without confrontation. It disciplines emotion gently, almost kindly, allowing the mother to continue without disruption. Over time, she begins to associate emotional steadiness with moral success. A day without tears feels like an achievement. A week without visible strain feels like progress. The absence of breakdown becomes proof that she is managing correctly. The fact that this management requires assistance fades into the background. There is a subtle relief in this arrangement. Tears, once suppressed chemically, no longer threaten to expose vulnerability. The risk of being truly seen is reduced. The household remains unaware of the internal weather. Calm becomes the default presentation, and calm is rewarded. Yet, something is lost in the quiet. Tears are not merely expressions of weakness, they are signals. They mark thresholds crossed, limits reached. When they are preempted rather than acknowledged, those limits become harder to discern. The body learns to bypass its own warnings, trusting chemistry to intervene before feeling can fully register. The mother may sense this loss dimly, in rare, unguarded moments. A memory surfaces and fails to stir emotion. A story that once moved her now passes without effect. The flattening is subtle, easily dismissed as maturity or resilience. But it lingers, an absence felt more than understood. Still, the alternative feels unthinkable. To allow the tears would invite questions. To answer those questions would require explanations that disrupt the household's smooth functioning. Laudanum spares her this negotiation. It keeps the interior private by keeping it quiet. And so the tears remain uncried, absorbed into the body, dissolved before they can form. The bottle continues its quiet work, ensuring that nothing spills over, that nothing demands attention. In a world where certain emotions have no place, laudanum becomes the gatekeeper, deciding which feelings may pass and which must be turned away. The pause is brief, almost imperceptible. It occurs between the question and the notation, between the patient's measured answer and the doctor's penciled line. The pencil hovers, suspended for a moment over the paper, as if weighing something it will not name. Then it moves again, and the moment passes without comment. The doctor has seen this before. He has learned to recognize the pattern without acknowledging it. The symptoms are familiar in their vagueness: sleep that comes only with assistance, nerves that quiet reluctantly, aches that return too quickly when relief wears thin. None of these are alarming in isolation. Together, they suggest something more complicated, something that does not fit neatly into the margins of his ledger. He asks how she is managing. She answers as she has learned to answer, calmly, efficiently, without emphasis. She does not list every discomfort. She does not describe the quiet urgency with which evening approaches. She does not mention the way her body anticipates the bottle before her mind does. There is no reason to. The conversation has a shape, and both parties understand it. The doctor nods. His pencil pauses again, just long enough to suggest consideration. He could ask more. He could inquire about frequency, about duration, about what happens when the drops are missed. But such questions would complicate the visit. They would require time, alternatives, explanations he does not possess. They would transform a routine consultation into something less certain. So he resumes writing. The prescription is renewed with a slight adjustment, nothing dramatic. A practical response to symptoms that persist. He frames it as attentiveness rather than escalation. The body changes. Treatment must adapt. This is medicine, not indulgence. The pause, though fleeting, carries weight. It marks the moment when recognition brushes against responsibility and turns away. The doctor senses that the remedy has become regular, perhaps essential. But the patient remains upright. The household remains orderly. There is no visible crisis demanding intervention. To act would be to disrupt a functioning system. Victorian medicine is not equipped to address dependency that presents as stability. Its tools are designed for acute conditions, for visible decline. Laudanum complicates this framework by maintaining appearance while eroding autonomy. The doctor's training offers no clear guidance here. The safest course is continuation. He reassures her again, his voice steady, practiced. This will help. Continue as before. Adjust slightly if necessary. He does not warn against excess, because excess is not visible. He does not suggest alternatives because none are readily available. Rest, after all, is a luxury she cannot claim. Emotional expression is not a treatment. The bottle remains the most efficient solution. The patient accepts this without question. The reassurance aligns with her experience. The remedy works. The doctor's confidence validates her reliance. The pencil's pause is forgotten almost as soon as it occurs, absorbed into the rhythm of care. Later, she may remember the visit only vaguely. Another prescription, another affirmation that her approach is correct. The bottle remains legitimate, sanctioned, protected by professional authority. Any private unease she feels dissolves under the weight of that approval. The doctor leaves with his ledger closed, the encounter complete. The pencil's pause does not appear in the records. It leaves no trace, no notation to suggest hesitation or concern. And because it is undocumented, it cannot prompt change. This is how escalation proceeds, not through decisive moments, but through quiet continuations. A slightly heavier line on paper. A marginal increase justified by persistence of symptoms. A pause that acknowledges possibility without acting upon it. In this space between recognition and response, dependency deepens. The doctor's pencil moves on, and with it, the opportunity to intervene slips quietly away. Children grow up inside patterns long before they understand them. The rhythms of the house shape their sense of normalcy, the way morning arrives, the way evening settles, the tone of voices at certain hours. They do not notice what is consistent. They notice only what breaks. And because laudanum preserves consistency so carefully, it leaves no obvious trace for a child to see. To them, their mother is simply as she has always been. Calm when calm is required, firm when order must be kept, gentle at bedtime, composed at the table. Her moods follow a reliable arc, smoothing toward evening, never tipping too far in either direction. This steadiness feels natural, even comforting. Children learn to trust it without question. They do not see the effort behind it. They do not know that the evening softness has been assisted, that patience has been measured in drops. They assume that adulthood brings control, that mothers simply know how to remain composed. The idea that such balance might require intervention never occurs to them. Even as they grow older, their understanding remains framed by appearances. They notice other households where tempers flare, where voices rise sharply, where exhaustion spills into open irritation. In comparison, their own home feels stable. They may even feel quietly proud of it. Their mother does not falter. She does not unravel. She manages. When illness appears, it is explained neatly. Mother has a headache, mother is tired, mother needs her medicine. These explanations fit comfortably within a child's understanding of the world. Medicine is for fixing things. Medicine makes people better. There is no reason to question its presence. The bottle itself is unremarkable. It sits among other remedies indistinguishable from cough syrups and tinctures. Children learn early not to disturb such objects. They are adult concerns, handled without ceremony. The bottle's brown glass does not invite curiosity. It looks serious, official, off limits. As years pass, the children internalize the household's emotional economy. Calm is expected. Disruption is corrected quickly. They learn that feelings must be managed quietly, efficiently. They do not realize that they are absorbing a model shaped by chemical moderation rather than natural rest. They simply learn what is modeled. If there are moments when their mother seems distant, when laughter arrives a beat too late, when reactions feel softened, they attribute it to adulthood itself. Adults, after all, are different, less reactive, less intense. This distance is interpreted as maturity, not absence. In adolescence, when they begin to test boundaries and push against restraint, they may find their mother oddly unshaken. Arguments do not escalate as expected. Anger does not flare dramatically. Consequences are delivered calmly, without excess emotion. This composure is admired, even feared slightly. It lends authority. What they do not see is the narrowing behind that composure, the way emotional responses have been disciplined into a narrow range, the way extremes have been smoothed away over time. Laudanum has taught the body to remain within acceptable limits, and the children experience only the outcome. If questions arise, they are vague and fleeting. Why does mother always seem tired in the mornings? Why does she disappear briefly in the evenings? The answers come easily. Adults are busy. Adults need quiet. Adults have routines. None of this feels alarming. And so the children never notice. Not because the truth is hidden, but because it is woven seamlessly into daily life. There are no dramatic scenes to mark the passage of dependence. No visible collapse to reframe memory. Only continuity. Years later, when the children leave the home and begin lives of their own, they carry this model with them. Calm equals competence. Emotion must be managed. Relief is something to be earned quietly. The pattern replicates itself, unexamined. This is the quiet inheritance laudanum leaves behind, not only in the body of the woman who used it, but in the expectations of those who grew up beneath its influence. The children never noticed the bottle. They noticed only the steadiness it produced. And because of that, they learned to believe that such steadiness was simply what adulthood required. The fatigue does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates, a slow erosion rather than a collapse. Each day demands its portion, and each night returns less than it takes. The body adapts by borrowing, stealing small amounts of strength from the days ahead to survive the one at hand. Laudanum makes this borrowing feel orderly, even sensible, disguising depletion as balance. In the early years, the remedy seems to give back what was lost. Sleep improves, pain dulls, mornings become tolerable again. The mother feels as though she has reclaimed something that was unfairly taken from her. She is not avoiding work, she is better able to perform it. This distinction matters deeply. The energy she feels after a night of assisted rest feels legitimate, not stolen. But the body remembers the cost, even when the mind does not. Each borrowed hour of calm must be repaid. The debt does not announce itself with urgency. It lingers quietly, compounding over time. The morning arrives a little heavier. The limbs feel slower to respond. The space between effort and exhaustion narrows. Laudanum smooths over these signs, masking the imbalance it helps create. When energy falters, the solution feels obvious. Another adjustment, another small increase. The logic remains consistent. If the day demands more, the body must be helped to meet it. Borrowing becomes routine. The mother does not think in terms of depletion. She thinks in terms of continuity. The household must run. Children must be tended. Obligations must be met, regardless of internal reserves. The future feels abstract compared to the immediacy of daily demands. Tomorrow's fatigue can be managed when it arrives. Today's work cannot wait. Over time, however, the sense of restoration grows thinner. The calm remains, but the vitality beneath it feels diminished. Energy becomes something that must be carefully rationed, allocated strategically. Social visits require preparation. Unexpected tasks feel overwhelming. The body resists spontaneity, preferring the predictable rhythm laudanum supports. This borrowed energy alters perception. The mother begins to experience days not as cycles of renewal, but as stretches to be endured. Rest no longer restores, it merely stabilizes. The line between functioning and fatigue blurs, and the remedy that once felt like assistance begins to feel necessary simply to maintain baseline. Yet there is no clear moment when borrowing becomes dependency. The transition is gradual, hidden within routines that appear successful. The house remains orderly, the children are cared for. The woman remains upright. From the outside, nothing suggests decline. Inside, however, the cost accumulates. Emotions flatten, curiosity wanes. The body moves efficiently but without surplus. There is little left over at the end of the day, no energy for reflection, for desire, for anything beyond what is required. Laudanum ensures performance, but it does not replenish what performance consumes. Still, the arrangement persists because it works, at least in appearance. The future remains a vague concept, easily postponed. Tomorrow will bring its own remedies. For now, the borrowed energy carries her through another day. This is the quiet arithmetic of dependence. Relief today, repayment deferred. The balance sheet remains unseen because it is never reviewed. And so the borrowing continues, one evening at a time, until the body no longer remembers how to operate without credit. Memory does not disappear all at once. It loosens. It fades at the edges like ink left too long in sunlight. The mother does not notice the change immediately, because forgetting arrives gently, without violence or alarm. It feels less like loss and more like relief. At first, the softening is welcomed. Sharp recollections dull. Moments that once carried weight, arguments, disappointments, quiet humiliations lose their urgency. The mind releases them more easily now, as though learning a new kindness toward itself. Laudanum does not erase the past. It quiets its insistence. This seems beneficial. Why cling to discomfort when the day requires steadiness? Why carry memories that offer no solution? The remedy appears to help her live more fully in the present, unburdened by the constant echo of what has already been endured. The house feels lighter for it. Conversation flows more smoothly. The past stops intruding at inconvenient hours. But the softening does not discriminate. Along with pain, it dulls texture. Details slip away. A conversation from the morning feels distant by afternoon. A child's remark lingers without clarity. The sequence of events blurs, not enough to cause concern, but enough to feel unfamiliar. She compensates instinctively. Lists become more important. Routines tighten. Objects are kept in fixed places to reduce reliance on recall. These adjustments feel practical, not alarming. Everyone forgets things after all, especially busy women. Yet there are moments brief, unsettling when she cannot retrieve what she knows she should remember. A word stalls mid-sentence. A name hesitates on the tongue. The pause is small, easily covered, but it leaves an impression. She laughs it off. Fatigue explains everything. Laudanum encourages this dismissal. It smooths the frustration that might otherwise provoke concern. The mind slides past gaps rather than stopping to examine them. Forgetting becomes less distressing and therefore less urgent to address. The remedy teaches her how not to notice. Memory, once softened, also loses its authority. Lessons from past discomfort carry less weight. The body remembers relief more clearly than consequence. If a previous dose led to unease the following day, that unease fades faster than the memory of calm. The balance tips quietly toward repetition. This alteration affects emotional memory as well. Feelings detach from their origins. Sadness arrives without context, then dissolves. Joy appears briefly, then passes without imprint. The emotional landscape flattens, becoming easier to navigate but harder to inhabit deeply. To those around her, nothing appears wrong. She remains attentive, capable, present. The softening is subtle enough to avoid notice, gradual enough to feel natural. Aging, perhaps. Maturity. The inevitable dulling of intensity that adulthood brings. But internally, something has shifted. Memory no longer serves as anchor or guide. It becomes impressionistic, suggestive, rather than precise. The present feels safer than the past, not because it is kinder, but because it is quieter. Laudanum has accomplished this without force. It has not demanded forgetting. It has simply made remembering less necessary. Painful memories lose their grip, and with them, the capacity to measure what has been lost or changed. In this softened state, the mother continues. The house runs. The days pass. The past recedes into a haze that feels merciful rather than alarming. And because forgetting arrives as comfort, no one thinks to resist it. The visits continue as they always have. Tea is poured. Chairs are arranged. Polite conversation unfolds in practiced rhythms. From the outside, nothing has changed. The mother receives her guests with the same courtesy, the same composed attentiveness that has long been expected of her. And yet, something essential has shifted subtly enough to evade notice, completely enough to alter the experience. She is present in form, but not in weight. Her responses arrive on time, correctly shaped, but they do not linger. Laughter surfaces easily, then fades without echo. Sympathy is expressed, appropriately measured, but it does not settle into her chest. She listens, nods, replies, and afterward remembers little of what was said. This absence does not trouble her as it might have once. Laudanum has softened the friction that would otherwise draw attention to it. The emotional labor of social engagement has become easier, less demanding. She no longer braces herself for visits, no longer dreads the effort of maintaining composure. The remedy has flattened the terrain, making conversation easier to traverse, if less meaningful. Guests do not notice the difference. They are absorbed in their own narratives, their own need to be heard. They register only that she is calm, agreeable, attentive. In a society that values restraint, this demeanor is rewarded. A woman who does not dominate conversation, who does not display excess emotion, is considered well-mannered. Presence, in this context, is measured by propriety rather than depth. The mother learns to rely on this. Social visits no longer exhaust her in the same way. The emotional peaks and valleys that once accompanied them are now smoothed into a steady, manageable flow. She can host without anxiety, converse without strain. The relief feels practical, even generous. Yet there is a cost that surfaces only afterward, in the quiet. When the door closes behind the last guest and the house settles again, she finds herself oddly hollow. The conversations leave no residue. The shared laughter feels borrowed, not retained. There is no sense of connection to carry forward, no warmth to recall. The visits pass through her without anchoring. She attributes this to fatigue, to age, to the sheer number of obligations that crowd her days. It does not occur to her to question the mechanism that made the visit easier. Ease, after all, is desirable. Depth is optional. Over time, this pattern becomes familiar. Social interaction is no longer something she enters fully. It is something she manages. Laudanum ensures that her responses remain appropriate, her demeanor untroubled. It allows her to fulfill social expectations without becoming entangled in them. This detachment is subtle enough to escape concern. The mother is not withdrawn. She is not cold. She performs warmth convincingly. The difference lies in what remains afterward, and no one asks about that. The Victorian social world prizes appearances over interiors. As long as the visit proceeds smoothly, its success is assumed. Presence is judged by behavior, not by feeling. In this framework, Laudanum excels. It produces the correct signals without demanding emotional investment. And so the visits continue, polite and empty, successful and forgettable. The mother remains at the center of them, smiling, responding, present enough to satisfy expectation, absent enough to preserve herself. The body, in the Victorian home, is expected to move according to strict schedules. Meals, chores, and social obligations adhere to clocks and routines. Yet beyond the visible rhythm lies another, subtler cycle, the internal timing of fatigue, tension, and relief. For the mother who uses Laudanum, this internal clock becomes increasingly intertwined with the prescribed hour of assistance, until the body itself learns when to expect intervention. By mid-afternoon, a dull tightness gathers across the shoulders. The lower back stiffens, unannounced but insistent. The eyes grow heavy, though the household still demands attention. The remedy, taken shortly before dusk, has been timed to meet this crescendo. It does not arrive too soon, for that would dull the day unnecessarily. It does not arrive too late, for that would leave strain unchecked. The body, through repeated experience, begins to anticipate this precision. This anticipation is subtle at first. Fingers brush the bottle with familiarity before thought. The hand moves toward it, almost instinctively, guided by muscle memory rather than conscious decision. The mind notes only in passing, distracted by household needs and social preoccupations. The internal clock, learned through years of necessity, signals the hour, signaling relief before conscious desire can form. Over time, the effect becomes more profound. The body begins to respond even before the drops are taken. Muscles relax, heart rate slows, breath eases. The nervous system, trained to expect chemical assistance, adjusts its response in anticipation. Relief is no longer entirely chemical. It is partly built into the body's expectations. Habit has merged with physiology. This learned timing affects perception as well. The approach of evening is felt as a tightening, a tension that cannot be ignored. She recognizes it not by conscious thought, but by instinct. The slight tremor in her hands, the faint pressure behind her eyes, the way the back of her neck stiffens as if the day itself has taken physical shape. Each signal tells her what is to come, and she moves accordingly, retrieving the bottle as naturally as one would a cup of tea. Yet this integration carries a quiet cost. The body's reliance on external regulation blunts its own ability to manage naturally. Sleep that once came unassisted now waits for chemical prompt. Patience that once arose spontaneously now leans on dosage. Energy that once replenished itself now anticipates intervention. The hour becomes both a signal and a requirement. The household notices only what is visible. She rises, sits, speaks, and moves with steadiness. No tremors betray anticipation. No irregular pulse alarms the observer. To the outside eye, the internal timing is invisible, a private negotiation between body and remedy. It is effective precisely because it leaves no mark beyond the practiced composure. Even the mother regards it with a mixture of trust and dependence. She knows that the hour will come, that the tension will be smoothed, that the evening will arrive softened. She does not question the process. She accepts it as part of the natural order, as integral to survival as meals or chores. This learned rhythm extends beyond immediate relief. It governs preparation for social visits, adjustments for unexpected duties, and the pacing of household management. Anticipation shapes movement, speech, and attention. The body no longer merely endures the day. It predicts its own relief. And so, day after day, hour by hour, the body absorbs the lesson that tension is temporary, that calm is scheduled, that comfort is delivered on command. It is a quiet mastery, one that ensures continuity and composure, yet binds her ever more closely to the very regimen that maintains it. In learning the hour, the body has also learned its dependence. The relief is never permanent. Even as the evening settles and the drops take effect, the body remembers its own unrest, biding its time before the ache returns. Pain in the Victorian household is a quiet companion, arriving in measured waves rather than sudden storms, and it is this predictability that both conceals and deepens its influence. The mother becomes intimately acquainted with the subtle rhythms of her own suffering, learning, almost by instinct, when the respite will end. At first, the return is barely perceptible, a stiffness in the spine, a faint pressure behind the eyes, a whisper of tension along the shoulders. She does not speak of it. She does not acknowledge it. In a society where endurance is expected, complaint is a failure. To articulate that relief has passed would suggest weakness. To admit that it was temporary would challenge the authority of her own composure. She waits quietly, observing the body as it signals its discontent without recognition. Laudanum smooths the edges, but it cannot remove the cycle entirely. The softening it provides is ephemeral, a pause rather than a solution. And so the ache returns predictable, insistent, a reminder that the body operates on its own timetable. What was borrowed from tomorrow's energy must eventually be repaid. The evening's calm, achieved with care and chemistry, dissolves into the morning's tension, and she is left to navigate its presence with all the grace she can summon. This recurrence is managed silently. There is no dramatic collapse. There is no cry of frustration. The return of discomfort is internalized, catalogued, and tolerated. She adjusts her posture, tightens her shoulders against the lingering ache, and moves through her duties as if nothing has changed. Pain, for her, is a companion that must be borne discreetly, always subordinated to the expectations of others. Yet, even in this quiet endurance, there is a subtle education of the body. It learns to anticipate the chemical assistance that has softened previous waves. Each dose becomes not just relief but a signal. Calm arrives, then fades, then returns. The rhythm shapes movement, mood, and attention, conditioning both mind and body to rely upon intervention rather than natural resolution. Dependence creeps in under the guise of routine, unnoticed because it is measured and predictable. There is also a psychological consequence. The mind begins to equate calm with legitimacy and pain with failure. When the ache returns too quickly, it feels like a personal shortcoming, a weakness in will rather than a natural physiological cycle. The mother chastises herself quietly, never aloud, and she reaches for the remedy not from indulgence, but from necessity. Each recurrence reinforces the pattern, strengthening both habit and expectation. Observers remain unaware. Her demeanor is unchanged. The children notice nothing. The household proceeds as always. Even the husband, if present, registers only that she continues to function. The return of pain is a secret negotiation between body and remedy, an intimate arrangement invisible to all but her. Over years, this pattern ingrains itself. Relief is always temporary yet indispensable. The ache's return is both reminder and teacher, instructing the body to accommodate, the mind to anticipate, and the household to remain undisturbed. What is unremarkable on the surface carries profound influence beneath, a rhythm of endurance, chemical management, and quiet mastery that marks the invisible cost of survival. The mother understands this cycle without words. She cannot name it fully, cannot measure it precisely. She can only navigate it, adjusting dosage, posture, and timing to maintain composure. Pain may return too quickly, but so long as it does not break the household's order, it is permitted to exist, quietly, within the confines of her managed life. Even in the moments when the ache returns too swiftly, when the tension lingers longer than it ought, when the evenings blur into nights without true rest, she remains, at least outwardly, everything the household expects her to be: a good mother, composed, capable, attentive, and unwavering. In Victorian society, this title is not lightly earned, yet it is possible to preserve even when the body rebels through careful management and discreet assistance. Laudanum, in this regard, serves as both ally and tool. She rises each morning with a precision that seems effortless. Children stir, and she meets their needs with a voice calm enough to soothe, yet firm enough to instruct. Breakfast is prepared, schedules reviewed, lessons overseen. Every interaction carries the subtle weight of expectation, the expectation that a mother's labor is unending, that her patience is infinite, that her composure is unassailable. Even as the remnants of fatigue press into her joints, even as the echoes of the day's aches linger beneath her ribs, she moves as if nothing has shifted. The world, and indeed the household itself, measures her by outcomes rather than processes. Children who are fed, clothed, instructed, and guided are proof enough of competence. Meals served on time, clothes cleaned, chores completed. These are the metrics by which motherhood is judged. The internal cost of achieving them is invisible. A mother may weep silently behind closed doors, her body beguiled by chemical aid, her mind whispering fatigue she cannot admit. Yet none of this diminishes the external evidence. She is still a good mother. Laudanum ensures that the outward performance matches expectation. The softening of pain, the easing of tension, the dulling of emotional turbulence all arrive just enough to preserve the calm necessary for care. It does not restore her fully, nor does it erase the weight of her burdens, but it bridges the gap between endurance and functionality. With its assistance, she can smile when required, kneel to tie a child's boot, or instruct patiently through another round of arithmetic, as if the night had not stretched long and restless behind her. This maintenance of appearance becomes an art form. Timing, dosage, and ritual converge with instinct. She knows precisely when to take the drops, how to arrange the evening so that composure is preserved, and how to allocate energy to meet the household's relentless demands. Even when the body protests, even when fatigue whispers insistently, she continues, unnoticed, unremarked upon, yet impeccably present. Social expectation compounds the need for this equilibrium. Guests, neighbors, even casual observers measure the household by her steadiness. A mother who falters draws attention. A mother who wearies publicly risks censure. By remaining composed, she preserves not only her own reputation but the social order around her. She is the fulcrum upon which decorum balances, the quiet guarantor of propriety. And yet, the cost remains hidden beneath the surface. Emotional reservoirs are drained, pain is masked, nights stretch unrelieved. The title of good mother carries a weight that cannot be measured by smiles or meals alone. It demands invisible labor, a constant negotiation with body, mind, and chemical assistance. But so long as the household perceives her as calm and capable, the external world remains satisfied. In this careful balancing, she achieves something paradoxical, the preservation of her role, while sacrificing the full measure of herself. Each day she fulfills expectation. Each night she tempers the body's revolt. The world sees her as unwavering, competent, and, above all, virtuous. She is still a good mother not because her burdens have vanished, but because she has learned to manage them quietly, to endure them gracefully, and to ensure that the household's needs are always met before her own. Even as laudanum hums softly in the background, the title holds firm. She is, by all appearances, undiminished. And that, in a society that measures women so relentlessly by duty, is perhaps the greatest achievement of all. There comes a day, as inevitably as the turning of the seasons, when the bottle seems smaller than before, as though it has been sipped more quickly than expected. The drops, once measured with ease, now fall with a quiet urgency, each one heavier in significance than the last. It is not dramatic. There is no alarm, no sudden revelation. Yet the change is perceptible to the woman who has grown accustomed to its rhythm, for the body knows when relief arrives late, and the mind remembers what it has relied upon. The morning begins as usual. Children rise, the household stirs, and she attends to her duties with careful composure. But beneath the calm, a tension gathers. The ache returns slightly sooner than it ought. The fatigue presses more insistently into the limbs. A sense of alertness, once manageable, edges into discomfort. She notices the weight of anticipation, the subtle anxiety that the remedy may not arrive as punctually as it has in years past. There is no one to witness this observation. The household relies on appearances. The children demand routine. The servants respond to orders. The husband, if present, takes no measure of the private tempo of her body. And so she navigates this subtle acceleration alone, aware that the pattern she has depended upon is faltering. The first response is practical. She measures the drops more carefully, watches the clock, times the ritual with precision she has not needed before. The bottle is emptied slightly faster, but it still delivers the familiar softening that allows her to continue. The body, sensitive to rhythm, responds, relaxing in expectation of the scheduled calm. The mind, relieved by predictability, focuses once more on the household rather than itself. Yet in the quiet, she recognizes that dependency has deepened. The remedy is no longer simply a convenience, it is an instrument of survival. This accelerated consumption carries its own subtle anxieties. She wonders whether the body has begun to demand more than before, whether the intervals of relief have shortened permanently. Each day that the bottle empties more quickly, each evening that she reaches for it slightly earlier or slightly more generously, reinforces the quiet arithmetic of reliance. It is not indulgence, it is necessity. And necessity, she knows, is justified by duty. The household remains unaffected. Meals are served, children are guided, social visits proceed without disruption. To every observer, the arrangement functions as it always has. Yet beneath the surface, the body's signals have changed. The internal clock, once calibrated perfectly to the drops, now counts down faster. The nervous system anticipates intervention with subtle urgency. Even as calm arrives, it feels borrowed more urgently than before. She does not think of this acceleration as loss. It is framed as efficiency, an adjustment to maintain composure under continuing demands. The world requires her calm, and the remedy ensures it. In this framing, the faster emptying bottle is neither scandal nor threat. It is simply a tool, used as needed to preserve order. Yet, in moments of solitude, when the house has quieted and the children sleep, the recognition settles softly. The rhythm she once commanded is now dictated, in part, by the bottle itself. Its emptiness marks not only the passage of days but the subtle claim it holds over time, attention, and the very body that must respond. The calm it delivers remains, but the reliance it engenders has deepened. She drinks, measures, waits, and continues, as she always has, maintaining the house, her duty, and herself in delicate balance. The doctor's visit, once brisk and unquestioning, begins to carry a subtle difference, not in overt speech, nor in the prescriptions themselves, but in the quiet modulation of his voice, the slight hesitation, the brief pause before reassurance, the careful shaping of words that once flowed without nuance. He notices what the household has not. The bottle empties more quickly, the calm it delivers less permanent, the body more insistent in its demand for relief. At first, the change is imperceptible. He asks the usual questions. How are you feeling? How are the children? Are the household duties manageable? Her responses are measured, practiced, just as they always have been. She does not mention the slightly heavier doses, the evening's tension arriving earlier, the fatigue pressing beneath even a night of sleep. There is no need. The household depends on appearances, not confessions. The doctor senses, yet leaves unsaid, what she will not speak aloud. The pencil in his hand hovers longer above the paper than before. He marks the dosage, adjusts it slightly, then replaces the cap on the prescription. His tone carries caution now, gentleness sharpened by observation. He offers more frequent reassurances, reminding her of the importance of moderation. He emphasizes careful counting of the drops, the precise intervals, the necessity of adherence. In his phrasing, there is a subtle acknowledgement that the remedy is no longer merely optional. It is a hinge upon which composure has come to depend. He may speak of side effects now, softly, almost apologetically, as if offering warning without accusation. He mentions fatigue, dizziness, the possibility of tolerance increasing, the body acclimating to the substance. Each word is carefully measured, professional yet pointed, designed to inform without alarming. He must maintain authority, but the authority now includes awareness of dependency he cannot fully address within the constraints of society or practice. The mother listens with quiet attention, nodding in understanding, masking any apprehension. She does not speak of the internal reckoning the way her body anticipates relief before it arrives, the subtle anxiety that accompanies the faster emptying bottle, the faint recognition that each dose is becoming indispensable. These thoughts are private, beyond the reach of professional observation. The doctor's tone may have shifted, but her reliance remains discreetly unspoken. In the consultation, reassurance and caution intermingle. He affirms the efficacy of the remedy, praises the management of the household, acknowledges her strength, yet beneath the compliments is a gentle, almost imperceptible questioning, a sense that the line between remedy and necessity has blurred. He cannot intervene fully without overstepping social norms. He cannot prescribe alternative support without questioning the very structure of domestic expectation. So he observes, notes, and advises, leaving the ultimate balance to her own discretion. After he departs, the impression lingers. The shift in tone has not alarmed the household, nor disrupted its functioning, yet it has registered in her mind. She recognizes the subtle acknowledgement of reliance, the quiet reminder that what was once a tool has become a support she cannot do without. The body has learned the hour, the mind has learned the rhythm, and even as she continues her duties, as the children are fed and the household moves as expected, she carries the knowledge that the equilibrium she maintains is partially held by chemistry and partially by observation. The doctor's softened tone becomes a mirror, reflecting what she already knows but has learned to ignore. The remedy continues to deliver calm, yet the awareness of dependence, delivered in hushed professional cadence, cannot be fully dismissed. In that quiet acknowledgement, the bond between body, mind, and medicine is rendered unmistakable, still invisible to the world, yet fully present to her. The rhythm of the household is dictated not only by meals, chores, and visitors, but increasingly by the quiet certainty of scheduled relief. Days are no longer simply measured by sunlight or clockwork, they are measured by the intervals between doses. The mother arranges her activities around the bottle, anticipating the moments when calm will arrive, when tension will ease, when the ache will retreat just enough to allow composure. In this way, laudanum quietly becomes the pulse of the household. Morning begins with preparation. She rises while the house is still cloaked in the half-light of dawn, her body carrying the residue of yesterday's borrowed energy. The children stir soon afterward. Breakfast must be prepared. Lessons, errands, and correspondence demand attention. Yet all movement, all planning, is filtered through awareness of the hour. She knows that by mid-afternoon the first wave of strain will emerge. By evening, the bottle will provide its familiar softening. This knowledge shapes every decision, every pause, every measured breath. The day itself becomes a sequence of smaller intervals. Tasks are timed according to the energy available, the strain anticipated, the approach of chemical relief. She walks, talks, and directs with precision, but beneath her calm, she senses the body's subtle countdown. Muscles stiffen at predictable moments. The mind grows restless in intervals that have been learned and internalized. There is no sudden alarm, no dramatic collapse, only the quiet, persistent push of physiology against the demands of duty. Each dose functions as both remedy and anchor. When it arrives, the tension softens just enough to allow movement and attention to proceed without disruption. She performs her duties with renewed steadiness, though not with the unassisted vitality of a body unaccustomed to chemical intervention. Even the simplest gestures, the pouring of tea, the folding of laundry, the reading aloud of lessons, carry an underlying reliance on the familiar timing of relief. The household runs smoothly, yet it is subtly choreographed around necessity rather than spontaneity. Visitors arrive, social obligations are met, the children are guided, and each activity aligns to the timetable dictated by chemistry. Deviations are stressful. Unscheduled interruptions threaten the fragile balance. She has learned to anticipate every ripple of fatigue, every whisper of unrest, and to prepare accordingly. In this way, laudanum is not simply medicine, it is a tool of management, a regulator of both body and household. The mental dimension of these structured days is equally pervasive. She monitors herself constantly, noting the approach of strain, the ebbing of calm, the subtle pressure behind the eyes. Each interval is anticipated and accounted for. Reflection is measured, emotion is moderated. Memory softens at predictable points, providing further ease of navigation. Every aspect of her experience, from thought to movement to attention, is coordinated around the certainty of the drops. Yet, for all its utility, this structure imposes a quiet limitation. Spontaneity is impossible. Energy cannot be deployed freely. Decisions are made with regard to timing rather than desire. The body's natural rhythms are overridden by expectation and necessity. Relief, while reliable, comes at the cost of autonomy. By evening, the day concludes as it began, with careful observation, measured movements, and the anticipation of the familiar dose. The household is preserved, composure is maintained, children are guided, duties fulfilled, and the world perceives nothing amiss. But beneath the order, the subtle dependence on timing has become an invisible architecture upon which the entire day rests. Each day, structured meticulously around drops, reinforces the quiet dominance of the remedy, its presence invisible, its necessity absolute. The irritation rises slowly, like a faint draft that slips through a closed window unnoticed until it chills the room. It is not tied to any visible event, no quarrel, no misstep, no failure. It exists simply because the body has grown accustomed to its rhythms, and when the rhythm is slightly disturbed, the mind senses the imbalance. A drawer sticks, a child lingers too long at the table, a footstep arrives just a beat too late. The annoyance flares, inexplicably, quietly, and the mother absorbs it with practiced restraint. She does not voice the irritation. To do so would imply fault, either in herself or in those around her, and in the disciplined world of the Victorian home, fault is to be concealed. She straightens her posture, adjusts her voice, smooths her expression. The household perceives only calm. Her hands fold neatly, her speech remains measured, her gaze steady. Inside, however, the tension sharpens, threading through the muscles and nerves with subtle persistence. Laudanum tempers these moments, blunting the edges before they can fracture her composure. A measured dose softens the irritability into tolerable neutrality. Thoughts that might have churned into complaint or impatience are dulled. The body's reaction is moderated, the mind's focus redirected toward task and duty. Yet the relief is temporary. It does not erase the underlying susceptibility. Irritation returns, often without warning, and always without a discernible cause. This recurrent disquiet teaches careful anticipation. She learns to recognize the faint signs that precede it, the slight stiffness in her fingers, the restless tightening across her shoulders, the subtle shadow behind the eyes. By preparing the bottle before the flare escalates, she controls the eruption, preventing it from touching the household. The irritation becomes both signal and reminder, an internal compass guiding the timing of relief. The children, if present, remain oblivious. They notice the steadiness, the measured patience, the soft attention. They do not observe the subtle tremor beneath her hands or the inward sigh that is swallowed before it becomes audible. The servants, too, are unaware. They follow her directions without deviation, unaware of the quiet vigilance required to preserve order. Even the husband, absorbed in his own duties or discourse, perceives only the calm, never the pressure beneath it. She comes to understand that irritation without explanation is part of the hidden cost of perseverance. It signals the body's need for intervention, but it cannot be addressed openly. Expression would disrupt the carefully maintained illusion of composure. It would draw attention, provoke commentary, or worse, invite judgment. And so she internalizes the sensation, letting it pass in measured acknowledgement, moderated chemically and mentally. The unpredictability of the irritation, its lack of identifiable cause, deepens the reliance upon routine and remedy. Each recurrence reinforces the learned expectation that relief must be available, that control must be maintained through precise timing, that the household's perception depends upon her successful modulation. The quiet eruption becomes a teacher, shaping behavior without requiring articulation. By evening, the flare has dulled, absorbed into the rhythm of the day and the evening dose. Calm returns, punctual, precise, as it always does. The household remains orderly. Children sleep. Visitors are received with grace. The work of the day is completed. And yet beneath it all, the subtle irritation lingers, a private acknowledgement of the body's persistent demands, a quiet reminder that composure is maintained at the intersection of duty, chemistry, and careful observation. In this way, irritation without explanation becomes not a disruption, but a measured instrument, another invisible rhythm upon which the household depends, another thread binding the mother to her daily negotiation between appearance and necessity. Illness in the Victorian household is a precise thing. Fever, infection, or visible injury announce themselves with clarity, commanding attention and response. But there exists another kind of ailment, subtle and pervasive, that refuses the language of doctors and the comprehension of household observers. It resides in the bones and the mind alike, manifesting as unease, fatigue, or vague malaise. It is a condition that cannot be neatly labeled, catalogued, or prescribed for in conventional terms. Yet it is real, insistent, and intimately familiar to the mother who endures it daily. She feels it first in the small, almost imperceptible ways, the tremor in her hands when a tray is lifted too long, the flutter behind her ribs when she moves too quickly, the faint throbbing that arises after repeated tasks. There is no fever to measure, no wound to examine. There is only the pervasive sense that the body is demanding more than it can sustain, that the mind is bracing against an invisible weight. In a household structured on appearances, such unarticulated suffering is dangerous precisely because it cannot be acknowledged without exposing vulnerability. Laudanum steps into this silence with its characteristic discretion. A measured dose softens the internal insistence. Muscles relax, thoughts no longer clatter against one another. The ache that cannot be named, the unrest that cannot be explained, diminishes just enough to permit function. It does not cure, nor does it alter the source of fatigue. It simply permits the household to proceed, preserving appearances at the expense of revealing truth. The mother has learned to recognize the thresholds of this unnamed illness. She feels its approach in the subtle tightening of the chest, the restless anticipation behind the eyes, the cumulative heaviness pressing upon her shoulders. Each signal is attended to quietly, measured against the clock, and managed with precision. The bottle is consulted not in crisis but as prophylaxis, a preventive measure against the escalation of discomfort that cannot be articulated. Family and visitors perceive nothing. Children continue their routines, unaware of the internal balancing act that allows meals to be served and lessons to be overseen. Servants follow orders, interpreting her directions as composed authority rather than managed effort. Even the husband, if present, interprets calm and attentiveness as natural resilience, unconnected to the chemical assistance that underwrites them. The illness, because it cannot be named, exists solely in the private domain of the body. This anonymity of suffering carries a quiet weight. It isolates as much as it preserves. She cannot complain. She cannot seek sympathy. Expression would disrupt the carefully constructed order of the household, and disclosure would threaten her identity as capable, present, and composed. Instead, the experience is internalized, managed silently, mitigated by laudanum, and recorded only in the subtle changes of posture, breath, and gesture. Over the years, the pattern solidifies. The mother's body anticipates both the onset of this unnamed illness and the intervention that softens it. Days are scheduled around relief, energy rationed to meet obligations, and composure maintained at all costs. The unspoken understanding between body and remedy becomes an invisible architecture, sustaining not only her own endurance but the appearance of a fully functioning household. Yet the cost is cumulative. Memory softens, emotions are muted, and spontaneity is constrained by the need for timing and control. The illness that cannot be named continues its quiet work, shaping thought, behavior, and expectation. The mother moves through life with it always present, a companion as persistent as it is invisible, mediated only by discipline, chemistry, and the unrelenting insistence of duty. In this way, the unnamed illness becomes both challenge and regulator, a quiet force shaping the household, directing attention, and maintaining order, while leaving its effects unacknowledged and invisible to the world beyond her own measured endurance. The body is not always obedient. It refuses boundaries that the mind would set, ignoring schedules, disregarding intention, and bending toward need even when necessity has been accounted for. For the Victorian mother, this rebellion is quiet, insidious, and intimately familiar. It arrives in subtle ways: a tremor in the hands, a restless tightening in the chest, a heat that creeps along the spine, signals that the equilibrium she has maintained through duty and chemical assistance is beginning to falter. Sobriety, in this sense, is not only a matter of abstaining from laudanum, it is the ability to exist fully within the limits of one's own endurance. Her body, however, has learned a different rhythm. It anticipates relief before it arrives, reacts before the mind can prepare, and insists on assistance whether reason dictates it or not. Even in the quietest moments, it signals impatience, a pressing for the calm that is no longer optional but demanded. Morning begins with a familiar weight pressing along the shoulders, as if the previous day's labor has not been resolved overnight. The children stir, the house awakens, and she rises with her accustomed precision, but the internal tension has already begun its cycle. By mid-afternoon, her limbs ache more readily. By evening, the faint tremor in her hands has become unmistakable. Each motion is executed with care, each step measured against the body's subtle insistence. The household observes none of this. The composure is complete, the routine uninterrupted. Laudanum is no longer a mere aid. It is a stabilizer, an external anchor that aligns body with expectation. The drops, carefully measured, restore the calm just enough to permit function. Without them, the body resists, refusing to cooperate with the day's demands. The limbs falter, the mind wearies, and the subtle irritability that has been subdued all day surfaces sharp and persistent. Even when taken, the relief is temporary. The body's insistence persists in quieter, more insidious ways, a memory of its own capacity for rebellion. She recognizes this pattern now, intimately. The body signals need before thought has formed it, anticipates dosage before consciousness demands it. It has learned its timing with the precision of a clock, yet its insistence cannot be fully negotiated. This awareness fosters a quiet anxiety, a recognition that the equilibrium she relies upon is not fully her own. Composure is maintained externally, but internally, her autonomy has shifted subtly toward the rhythm imposed by chemical assistance. The children and household remain oblivious. A mother must appear steady, and she does. Meals are prepared, lessons are given, duties are fulfilled. The pattern of life proceeds uninterrupted, and all external evidence confirms that nothing has changed. Yet the body, ungoverned by observation, insists privately, demanding mediation in ways that cannot be articulated. Even social interactions are calibrated to this internal rhythm. Visitors arrive and depart without knowledge of the subtle tension beneath her polite smiles. Her attention is measured, her response is timed, and her composure absolute. Only in solitude does she acknowledge the body's quiet defiance, a reminder that the ease she displays is borrowed, measured, mediated. Over time, the recognition settles like sediment. Sobriety, once natural, is now elusive. Relief is anticipated chemically, rather than achieved spontaneously. The body's refusal to cooperate independently becomes an invisible teacher, reinforcing reliance, shaping rhythm, and marking the boundaries of endurance. Thus, the mother continues, perpetually negotiating with a body that refuses sobriety, relying upon the measured drops that mediate between need and duty. Function persists, composure remains, and the household flourishes, all while the internal struggle, unspoken and unseen, dictates the terms of her endurance. Shame, in the Victorian household, is a quiet companion, uninvited yet constant. It does not arrive in grand gestures, nor does it announce itself with visible signs. It is the low hum beneath propriety, the faint pressure behind measured composure, the subtle reminder that one has failed not in deed, perhaps, but in the interior life that the household cannot observe. For the mother who relies upon laudanum, this shame is unspoken, unnamed, and therefore all the more insidious. She feels it in the moments between duties, in the brief seconds when no eyes observe. A sigh escapes the chest only to be swallowed. A tremor in the hand is hidden behind a napkin. A misstep in thought is corrected internally rather than aloud. The source is never identified clearly. Is it weakness? Is it reliance? Is it the very pleasure of calm that comes chemically rather than naturally? Words fail her. There is no language precise enough to capture the complexity of feeling that she must remain composed while secretly dependent. This lack of vocabulary does not lessen the shame, it intensifies it. Without words to name the condition, the mind turns inward, generating judgments that cannot be corrected, complaints that cannot be aired. She chastises herself for needing aid, for feeling relief that is mediated, for allowing her own body to dictate terms. Each drop of laudanum, while softening ache and fatigue, becomes simultaneously a silent indictment. Relief is granted, but at a price that is private and inescapable. In the presence of the household, the shame disappears behind mastery. Children are attended to, meals are served, and visitors are received with calm politeness. No tremor betrays the reliance that underpins her composure. The husband, if present, sees only order. Friends, neighbors, and servants perceive only consistency. The interior experience, the oscillation between relief and dependence, remains entirely hidden. To articulate it would compromise both reputation and household stability. Silence becomes both shield and sentence. Laudanum, in its quiet work, both relieves and reinforces. Each evening, when the familiar calm arrives, she experiences the paradox of relief intertwined with judgment. The tension that preceded it is softened, yet its source is remembered. The knowledge that she could not maintain composure without assistance hovers just beneath the surface. The shame has no vocabulary, yet it shapes thought, posture, and attention. It becomes as much a part of the routine as meal preparation or child supervision. Time deepens this quiet struggle. The rhythm of dependence becomes intertwined with duty. She measures energy, schedules labor, anticipates fatigue, and aligns all movement to the moments when relief will arrive. In doing so, she preserves the household, maintains appearances, and honors expectation. Yet every act of management carries the unspoken acknowledgement that it is not fully autonomous, that the calm is borrowed, that the strength is supplemented, that the endurance is chemically mediated. Even reflection, that rare luxury, is fraught. When she considers the day, she recalls the relief, the softened edges of fatigue, the ease of patience, and immediately counters it with internal critique. What did it cost? How much reliance has been normalized? The questions form without answers, and in the silence of contemplation, shame grows. Thus, the mother continues, navigating a life in which shame has no name, dependence is invisible, and relief is inseparable from guilt. Her exterior remains exemplary, her household thrives, and yet beneath every measured movement, every polite gesture, every fulfilled duty, the quiet, unnamed weight persists, a constant companion that neither the household nor she can fully articulate, shaping every act, every thought, and every breath. Loneliness is a companion that rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with a visitor's absence or the hush of empty rooms, for the house is never truly empty. Children chatter, servants move in, practiced rhythm, and social obligations punctuate the day. Yet loneliness persists, subtle and persistent, residing in the spaces between duty and expectation, in the margins of attention that no one notices. For the Victorian mother who relies upon laudanum, this loneliness is compounded, quietly sustained by both isolation and chemical moderation. The remedy softens, but it also separates. Each measured dose blunts tension and dulls emotional acuity, allowing her to navigate the day without visible strain. Yet it removes something else as well, the sharp edge of companionship, the intensity of shared feeling, the unmediated warmth that comes from direct presence. Relief arrives chemically, and with it comes the soft distancing of mind from sensation. The household continues its functions, yet the interior world feels slightly removed, quieter, more contained. She occupies her roles efficiently. Children are guided, chores completed, correspondence managed, social visits attended. The house appears calm, orderly, and well-maintained. From the outside, she is wholly present, attentive, capable, engaged, yet inside, her attention is divided. Part of her remains tethered to the bodily rhythms of dependence, anticipating the next dose, calculating its timing, negotiating its efficacy. The self that engages, directs, and comforts is partially distinct from the self that waits, observes, and measures. The loneliness is compounded by secrecy. No one knows the depth of her reliance, the subtle tremor of anticipation before the bottle is reached for, the internal calculations that govern every movement and decision. She cannot articulate the private solitude that comes from needing assistance to meet societal expectation. Words fail. There is no vocabulary for medicinal loneliness. To speak of it would risk judgment, compromise appearances, and disrupt the order she has meticulously preserved. Even during moments of intimate contact, the loneliness persists. A child's question, a husband's glance, a friend's conversation, these can provide warmth, but they cannot bridge the quiet, internal distance that laudanum imposes. Emotion is present, but softened. Joy is experienced partially, grief dampened, frustration muted. Connection is mediated chemically, not fully realized naturally. The self that feels is separate from the self that acts, and the gap between them is a private, persistent solitude. Yet she learns to navigate this. The structure of the day, the rhythm of doses, the timing of duties, all become scaffolding upon which she constructs a functional existence. She finds small compensations observing a child's expression, noting the pattern of sunlight across the table, feeling the warmth of tea between her hands. These moments anchor her to the world, even as the remedy keeps the edges manageable. Loneliness is softened, not erased, present, but tolerable. By evening, when the household quiets, the isolation is most palpable. Servants retire, children sleep, the household's noise falls away. The bottle sits nearby, promising relief and maintaining composure, yet leaving her alone with the softened contours of sensation. She leans back, measures her fatigue, feels the body's insistence, and drinks, not from indulgence, but from necessity. In this way, medicinal loneliness is both companion and teacher. It shapes the rhythm of the household, moderates behavior, and maintains appearances. Yet it cannot be named, cannot be shared, and cannot be fully dissolved. The mother continues, present outwardly, partially removed inwardly, navigating the quiet spaces where chemical aid preserves her function while deepening the solitude that no one else perceives. Motherhood, in the Victorian household, is seldom neutral. It is an existence defined by expectation, measured by patience, and constrained by duty. Every gesture, every word, every glance carries consequence. To falter, even briefly, is to risk judgment. Yet the burden is invisible to those for whom it is sustained. The mother walks this narrow edge daily, balancing care, composure, and the unrelenting demands of household life. Her days begin before the household fully awakens. Children stir with nascent energy, servants move in quiet rehearsal, and the husband's presence is assumed but not intrusive. She rises, already carrying the accumulated weight of expectation. Meals must be prepared, clothing maintained, lessons instructed, errands conducted. Each task is not merely performed, it must be performed with precision, ensuring no trace of strain is evident. Failure is not visible only when it is carefully concealed. Laudanum has become an essential companion in this balancing act. The drops arrive at prescribed intervals, softening tension, dulling aches, and tempering the restlessness that would otherwise disrupt composure. The remedy does not erase responsibility, it enables its execution. The edge upon which she stands is narrow, but it is made navigable by the chemical assurance of calm. Without it, the margin shrinks. Every task feels heavier, every interaction more exacting, every decision more fraught. The narrowness of the edge is defined as much by perception as by duty. Society measures mothers not by private endurance but by the visible outcomes of care. Children are fed, clothed, instructed. The household runs smoothly. Visitors are received politely. These results are interpreted as proof of skill and virtue, yet they obscure the internal negotiation required to maintain them. Every act of motherhood becomes a performance, the stakes invisible but acutely felt. The tension is cumulative. Each day's labor adds to the fatigue that laudanum must assuage. Each night's interrupted rest tightens the coil of expectation. The mind monitors the body constantly, anticipating the moment when relief will be needed, adjusting effort accordingly, negotiating between obligation and endurance. There is no reprieve. Even joy is measured, even laughter moderated. Emotional extremes are luxuries she cannot afford, yet they press against the edges of her restraint, reminding her that the narrow path is exacting. Isolation compounds the difficulty. Conversations do not touch this experience. Friends may remark on composure, servants may acknowledge efficiency, the husband may note capability, but no one perceives the delicate calculus behind every motion, every word, every sigh. Dependency upon the remedy remains private, as necessary to maintain the edge as the lessons, meals, and cleaning that fill the day. She moves through the hours with meticulous awareness. Each child's need is met promptly, each household task executed cleanly, each social interaction negotiated carefully. The edge she treads is sharpened by responsibility and softened only by the discreet intervention of laudanum. In its absence, the balance would falter, the household would notice, the performance would crack. By evening she leans briefly, hidden from view, feeling the day's tension dissolve in measured relief. The drops ensure she remains functional, yet they also underscore the fragility of the equilibrium. Motherhood on this narrow edge is sustained chemically, socially, and emotionally. The household sees only the outcome, never the precision required to maintain it. And so she continues standing every day on the fine line between endurance and collapse, supported invisibly by the remedy, guided by habit, constrained by duty, and perfected in silence. Each moment of calm is earned, each act of care deliberate, and each night's rest mediated, ensuring that motherhood, no matter how exacting, is never perceived to falter. Fear in the Victorian household is a quiet, unspoken companion, one that does not announce itself with loud cries or visible tremors. It threads through the mother's days, a subtle undercurrent beneath measured gestures and calm expressions. This fear is not born of immediate danger, but of discovery, the recognition by others that the composure she presents is sustained, not innate, that the calm she demonstrates is borrowed from chemistry rather than fully her own. She moves through her duties with precision, aware of the ever-present potential for observation. Every gesture is measured, every expression moderated. Children are attended to without hesitation, meals prepared without error, lessons instructed without impatience. The household appears as it always has, orderly and efficient. Yet she carries within herself the constant anxiety that a single misstep, a tremor of the hand, a pause in speech, a sigh too long might expose the hidden truth of her reliance. Laudanum provides a buffer, a quiet safety net. The drops arrive at predictable intervals, softening the tension, dulling the aches, tempering the restlessness that threatens to betray her. Yet the relief, while reliable, does not erase the underlying anxiety. She knows that the calm is fragile, that it can be undone by circumstance, by accident, by observation. Each dose, while restoring composure, also reminds her of the dependence she cannot disclose. Visitors, neighbors, and even family members reinforce this fear by their expectation of composure. A guest's glance, a servant's quiet scrutiny, a husband's measured question, all carry implicit judgment. They measure steadiness, attentiveness, and grace. There is no tolerance for lapses and no room for confession. To reveal reliance upon laudanum would disrupt the delicate social balance, invite censure, and undermine the careful construction of respectability. Even within her own mind, fear is constant. She anticipates each moment in which exposure might occur. The misplacement of the bottle, a forgotten dosage, the faint trace of restlessness at the table, these are all small risks, yet they loom large. She calculates every interaction, times every movement, and adjusts her performance according to the invisible standards imposed both externally and internally. The fear is both protective and oppressive, ensuring vigilance while constraining freedom. Isolation compounds this anxiety. No one truly understands the calculus required to maintain equilibrium, and she cannot confide in those around her. The children, young and perceptive only in certain ways, see calm but not effort. The husband, concerned with his own duties, perceives function but not necessity. Servants respond to authority, not vulnerability. The fear of discovery exists entirely within her consciousness, amplified by the silence that surrounds it. This fear shapes behavior subtly but persistently. She moves with care, speaks with precision, anticipates strain before it arises. Even joy is moderated. Laughter is measured. Spontaneity is rare, because unpredictability might expose what she works so hard to conceal. The life she leads is orderly, outwardly serene, yet it is sustained by a vigilance that is invisible, constant, and exhausting. As evening falls, the bottle is reached for once more, delivering calm and reassurance, smoothing tension before it escalates. Yet with the relief comes the knowledge that composure, once again, has been preserved by external aid. The fear does not vanish, it retreats slightly, only to return with the first stirrings of tomorrow's duties. Discovery is never far from thought, and the vigilance required to prevent it continues without pause. Thus, the mother endures, her household runs smoothly, she remains composed. Yet beneath the polished exterior, the fear of being discovered governs every measured breath, every careful gesture, and every calculated interaction. It is the silent engine that drives her performance, and the unspoken companion that ensures that, for all appearances, she remains ever upright, ever calm, and most importantly, still a good mother. The doctors, who once arrived with pencils poised and prescriptions neat, eventually learned to look past her, not out of neglect, nor through disinterest, but because what they observed required no further action. She remained upright, composed, and fully capable of meeting the household's needs. Meals were prepared, children were guided, visitors were received politely. The appearance of health, reinforced by the careful timing of laudanum, left little room for intervention, and the physician's attention drifted toward more visible ailments, more urgent conditions, or patients whose suffering could not be so subtly masked. To the trained eye, her composure was flawless. The tremor in her fingers, the slight fatigue beneath her eyes, the tension that tightened her shoulders only to be softened by chemical assistance. These signs were too faint to warrant commentary. She moved efficiently, her mind sharp, her attention precise. In every respect that the household could perceive, she required nothing extraordinary. The doctor's visits became formalities, rituals of affirmation rather than instruments of diagnosis. This neglect, or rather, this selective attention, carried its own quiet consequence. The remedy remained unexamined, its effects unmonitored. Dosages were renewed, schedules followed, and chemical dependence, if it existed, was invisible, because the household presented no evidence to suggest alarm. The doctor relied upon appearances, as did society at large, and appearances were meticulously maintained. The woman's reliance, though increasingly complete, passed without acknowledgement. In consultation, questions were brief and conventional. How are you feeling? Are the children well? Have you slept? Each response was measured and practiced, emphasizing stability rather than admitting vulnerability. She learned to navigate these exchanges with care, offering sufficient reassurance while withholding the nuanced truth of her dependence. The doctor, attuned to propriety and social expectation, rarely pressed further. There was nothing to report that fit the language of medicine. The symptoms were mitigated, the patient functioning. Even when subtle hints of strain appeared, they were absorbed into acceptable explanations. Fatigue became the result of household labor, irritability the reflection of social obligations, faint tremors the product of minor overexertion. Each plausible excuse allowed both mother and physician to preserve appearances. The household ran smoothly, and the physician moved on to concerns more visible, more urgent. This selective oversight reinforced the dependence. Relief was uninterrupted. The bottle remained central to daily function, and yet its centrality was unremarkable to others. In the absence of inquiry, the body's quiet demands could assert themselves without challenge, creating a cycle that relied on chemistry as much as habit. Her health, as society understood it, was preserved not through restoration of natural balance, but through the careful coordination of effort, expectation, and chemical assistance. In private, the woman felt the double weight of recognition and neglect. The doctor's indifference confirmed her performance, but left her reliance unexamined. Each prescription reinforced calm and composure, while simultaneously underscoring that it was not entirely self-generated. She had mastered appearances, yet the mastery was mediated by external substances, and the consequences of that mediation remained hidden, unspoken, and unchallenged. Thus, the mother continued, navigating a household in which her outward health remained unquestioned, her interior fatigue persistent, and her dependence silently sustained. The doctors, observing only what could be measured and verified, looked past the quiet necessity that structured her life, leaving her both unmonitored and uninterrupted, a condition perfectly suited to the maintenance of appearance, yet entirely reliant upon the hidden machinery of laudanum. Afternoons in the Victorian household stretch long, measured not only by the movement of the sun but by the invisible weight of obligation. The day appears orderly. Children occupy themselves with lessons and play. Servants move efficiently between tasks. The house maintains its rhythm. Yet beneath the surface, time carries another measure: the slow accumulation of fatigue, the quiet persistence of strain, and the careful calibration required to sustain composure through hours that seem endless. These are the long afternoon years, when duty never rests, and the body whispers of limits that society refuses to acknowledge. By mid-afternoon, the house is alive with muted activity. The clatter of teacups, the soft scrape of chairs, the hushed rustle of paper or cloth all mark the continuation of household labor. The mother moves among these sounds with practiced calm, attending to each responsibility with precision. To an observer, she is composed, present, fully engaged. She speaks, gestures, guides, corrects, and comforts without hesitation. The household functions seamlessly, and her presence is central to that order. Yet the body protests silently. Muscles tighten with accumulated exertion. Shoulders ache under tension that has been held too long. Nerves hum faintly beneath the surface, awaiting the familiar softening that will come only when the bottle is reached for. She senses these signals, monitors them carefully, and adjusts movement and posture to compensate. Relief, when it arrives, is deliberate and measured. It smooths the edges without altering the obligations that remain. The afternoon stretches differently for her than it does for others. Minutes are counted in terms of energy, not only in the clock's numerals. Each task is prioritized according to the body's capacity to endure. Unforeseen interruptions carry the threat of exhaustion. For the internal margins are narrow, the demands relentless. She walks, speaks, and works in constant negotiation with her own limits, aligning herself to the rhythm of obligation while silently anticipating the relief that will allow her to continue. Social expectation reinforces this tension. The house must appear calm and orderly at all times. Children must remain guided, tasks must be completed punctually, and any trace of fatigue must be concealed. To falter in composure would not only disrupt appearances but invite censure, subtle though it may be. Laudanum provides the means to maintain this equilibrium. Its measured intervention tempers exhaustion and irritability, allowing the performance of duty to proceed without obvious strain. The long afternoon years are also a meditation in invisibility. The mother's endurance is acknowledged only by the seamless functioning of the household. No one observes the quiet labor of maintaining composure, the anticipatory calculations of dosage, or the private tally of fatigue. Her struggle is invisible because the household sees only the outcomes: children fed, chores completed, guests received politely, the house preserved. Yet the cost persists. Energy is borrowed from days to come, patience is rationed, and the body learns to depend on external assistance to sustain continuity. Memory softens slightly, emotions are muted, and spontaneity is constrained by the invisible timetable of chemical relief. The afternoon, which might otherwise offer moments of repose, becomes a test of endurance, a sequence of measured movements governed by obligation, need, and quiet dependence. And so, the long afternoon years pass, marked by invisible labor, subtle negotiation, and chemical mediation. The household functions without interruption, appearances remain flawless, and the mother moves through the hours with grace. Yet beneath every gesture, every task, every careful smile, the quiet toll of endurance accumulates, shaping not only her body and mind, but the rhythm of the home itself. A rhythm dictated as much by laudanum as by duty. Time, relentless and unremarkable in its passing, carries children from infancy to independence with the quiet inevitability of a clock's steady tick. Yet the household's rhythm, once established around small hands, measured breath, and teacups, persists with startling constancy. The children grow, moving beyond the tutelage of their mother, yet the habits that govern their upbringing remain intact, their structure preserved by the very routines and dependencies that shaped their early years. The mother, herself shaped and sustained by laudanum, finds that her own habits have become as fixed as the household schedule. The mornings are no longer occupied with dressing and feeding, yet her attentions are still called upon. Meals are prepared not for toddlers but for adolescents, young men and women beginning to assert their independence. Lessons once dictated by necessity now follow tradition. The household moves with a familiarity that has been rehearsed over decades. And still, the bottle remains nearby, its presence as ordinary as the teacups upon the sideboard. Its role, once supplemental, has become structural. The habits formed in the long afternoon years persist unaltered. Each dose is timed, each movement measured, each gesture carefully aligned with expectation. The body, conditioned over years of reliance, anticipates relief with precision. The mind, trained to manage both duty and anticipation, navigates every interaction with the children, who themselves now move more autonomously but remain embedded in the rhythms of order she has long maintained. Children notice composure, but rarely perceive its source. They may comment on calm patience, the steadiness of instruction, or the elegance of measured responses. They may remark casually that mother is always serene, always capable, always attentive. Yet they do not observe the subtle dependence, the chemical mediation, or the internal negotiation that allows this appearance to persist. They inherit the habits of the household as naturally as they inherit furniture, schedules, and expectations unexamined, unquestioned, taken for granted. The persistence of these habits is double-edged. On the one hand, they ensure that the household functions with seamless order. Tasks are completed, social obligations met, and the family's structure preserved. On the other hand, they reinforce dependency. The body and mind, accustomed to assistance, learn to rely upon it continuously. The routines that once served as temporary scaffolding have hardened into permanent architecture, shaping each day with predictable precision. Even in the absence of immediate fatigue, the expectation of relief dictates movement, thought, and attention. The mother herself is aware, fleetingly, of this entrenchment. She recognizes that the ease of her composure is inseparable from the routines and substances that support it. The children's independence, while outwardly liberating, does not diminish her own reliance. Instead, it underscores the permanence of habit. The household has evolved, yet the habits that sustained it, hers included, remain unchanged, reinforced by the cycles of work, expectation, and chemical support. Evenings retain their familiar cadence. The bottle is consulted with precision. The muscles soften, the mind quiets, and the household moves seamlessly into repose. Children, grown though they are, perceive only the calm and guidance they have always known. They do not perceive the dependence that underpins it, the rituals that shape it, or the silent negotiation that allows their mother to remain composed, functional, and ever-present. In this way, time advances, children mature, and habits endure. The household appears steady, the mother remains competent, and the routines she has cultivated continue, unaltered in form, sustained by decades of subtle dependence. The patterns of care, composure, and chemical assistance persist, invisible to all but the one who must navigate them constantly. A mother whose life, though outwardly unchanged, is quietly shaped by habits that have become inseparable from her identity. Health, in the Victorian household, is never measured solely by function. It is interpreted through the lens of appearance, endurance, and the subtle negotiation between visible capability and private sensation. To be upright, attentive, and composed is to be considered well. To stumble, falter, or falter in temperament is to invite concern. For the mother who relies upon laudanum, this distinction becomes both blessing and burden. Her body, fatigued and chemically moderated, maintains outward competence, while internally, every ache, every shiver of exhaustion, and every flutter of weariness is absorbed into the notion of frailty. Frailty in Victorian discourse is treated as a natural, almost poetic condition. It is acceptable when it conforms to expectation. Slight pallor, quiet disposition, measured effort. The mother fits this narrative seamlessly. Her strength is apparent where necessary. Her weakness, when perceived, is interpreted with sympathy rather than judgment. Pain and fatigue, softened by laudanum, manifest just enough to satisfy the cultural understanding of womanhood, delicate, enduring, resilient, yet tender. This framing allows her dependence to remain invisible. The household sees not necessity but propriety, not reliance but refinement. Servants attend to tasks as directed. Children observe composure as inherent. The husband perceives capability and stamina rather than the quiet mediation that underlies it. The subtle cues of internal strain, the tension in her hands, the faint trembling in her voice, the fleeting hesitation before action are interpreted not as chemical dependency, but as the poetic frailty expected of a woman who has devoted herself entirely to family and household. The mother herself internalizes this perception. To name her own fatigue as dependency, to call attention to the relief she receives from the drops, would be to violate propriety, to admit to a weakness not sanctioned by culture. Instead, she frames her condition as frailty, as gentle limitation rather than chemical necessity. The language of vulnerability allows her to reconcile her reliance with her identity. The household remains stable, her duty remains fulfilled, and she continues to embody the idealized image of womanhood. Yet this framing carries consequences. The softening of health into frailty obscures the underlying cause. The subtle erosion of endurance is rendered invisible, and the body's signals, aches, restless energy, emotional dampening are interpreted as natural rather than mediated. Days are planned around duty, weeks measured by calm achieved through the bottle, months structured by anticipated need. The narrative of frailty legitimizes reliance without inviting scrutiny. Socially, the presentation of frailty ensures protection. Visitors remark on composure and diligence, offer sympathy for minor ailments, and admire patience and strength. The household continues uninterrupted, children thrive, chores are performed, meals arrive on time. Health, as perceived by all but the mother herself, remains intact, while the reality of dependence persists in private. The interplay between perceived frailty and actual dependence reinforces both habit and expectation. Each softened ache, each anticipated interval of calm, reinforces the body's adjustment to chemical support. The mind, accustomed to subtle regulation and anticipation, interprets the relief as inherent capacity. Frailty, in this way, becomes both shield and narrative, a means to maintain outward propriety while silently negotiating the interior reality of dependence. Evenings follow predictable patterns. The bottle is consulted, calm returns, the house settles. Fatigue and tension persist beneath, but they are rendered culturally invisible, translated into the familiar, acceptable language of frailty. The mother continues, her health described with poetic softness, while the internal mechanics of endurance, mediation, and chemical reliance remain her own secret, perfectly aligned with the expectations of propriety, invisibly sustained and quietly absolute. Illness, in the Victorian home, is more than a matter of body. It is a language, a measure, and a moral instrument. To be unwell is to possess a socially legible reason for restraint, a justification for the limits placed upon one's activity, and a shield against criticism for fatigue, inattention, or emotional lapses. For the mother who relies upon laudanum, this understanding transforms the private experience of bodily need into something almost honorable, even comforting, though the relief itself is chemically mediated. The body speaks softly at first, in sighs that escape unnoticed, in tension that lingers behind the shoulders, in aches that persist despite the day's labor. In a household governed by expectation, these signals might be disregarded as trivial or inconvenient, yet when framed as illness slight, socially recognizable, morally acceptable, they acquire significance. A headache, a restless night, a subtle nervousness, each can be understood as natural consequence, as frailty, as the appropriate response to effort and care. Laudanum arrives in this moral landscape as both remedy and reassurance. Its measured drops quiet the aches, temper the restlessness, and smooth the tension that rises with endless responsibility. Yet the relief it provides carries a dual significance. It is both practical and morally legible. The mother's endurance, moderated by chemistry, is translated socially into propriety. The household observes calm, attentiveness, and composure. The subtle strain that necessitated intervention becomes acceptable, even virtuous, because it manifests in familiar, recognized forms of illness. This framing allows private dependence to remain hidden while producing visible legitimacy. The mother can rest, recover, or soften without breaching social expectation. A sigh that might otherwise suggest fatigue becomes an emblem of virtue, a concession to the human body. A faint pallor, a momentary hesitation, a subdued irritability, all are interpreted as natural, morally comprehensible consequences of care and responsibility. The remedy, while central to the management of these effects, is invisible. The moral narrative overshadows the chemical one. Social perception reinforces this arrangement. Visitors observe composure softened by slight fatigue and interpret it charitably. Children recognize patience moderated by occasional weariness. The husband perceives efficiency tempered by natural limits. Each instance of illness is a signal that she has labored well, carried responsibility faithfully, and borne the household's demands with grace. Dependency is never named. It is disguised in the culturally approved forms of recognized frailty. Yet the moral comfort is not without its subtle cost. Illness, even when socially legible, becomes a medium through which dependence is normalized. Relief is welcomed, yet reliance upon it deepens. The body learns to anticipate chemical assistance. The mind grows accustomed to the quiet structuring of effort around doses. The household remains functional and unaware, and the mother's internal negotiation continues, invisible and necessary. Evening draws the day to its familiar close. The bottle is reached for, its presence expected, its effects reliable. The household settles into quiet routine. The children sleep, tasks are complete, and composure reigns. Within the mother, tension softens, aches fade, and the moral comfort of illness is reinforced. The recognition that her temporary weakness is socially and ethically understood, acceptable, and, paradoxically, even virtuous. Thus, illness becomes both shield and structure, a vehicle for propriety and a facilitator of chemical support. The mother's endurance continues, morally sanctioned, socially invisible, and quietly dependent. Each recognized ache, each socially legible fatigue, confirms not only her propriety but the necessity of the quiet, invisible assistance upon which her performance has come to rely. In the Victorian household, everything is performed for observation, and yet nothing of consequence is truly witnessed. Labor is continuous but invisible, composure is maintained without applause, and suffering is softened without recognition. For the mother who relies upon laudanum, this creates a peculiar and persistent condition, a life conducted entirely in the absence of public reckoning. Her struggles, her dependence, and even her relief pass unnoticed, measured only by the seamless continuation of the household around her. The house runs with the quiet efficiency of rehearsed motion. Children complete lessons, servants execute tasks, meals appear at proper hours, and visitors are received with grace. Each outward sign conveys stability, attentiveness, and propriety. To any observer, there is no crisis, no collapse, no reason for concern. The household functions as a self-sustaining mechanism, and the mother, its pivot, is assumed to be fully capable by virtue of her visible performance alone. Laudanum smooths the subtle fractures that lie beneath this facade. A few measured drops temper fatigue, dull, lingering aches, and moderate irritability that would otherwise reveal strain. The effect is silent. The household sees only the outcomes: children fed, tasks completed, manners observed. What lies beneath the quiet negotiation between body, mind, and chemical relief remains unrecorded, unremarked upon. There is no documentation, no acknowledgement, no testimony of the effort required to sustain appearances. Even the physician, who once scrutinized her with pencil poised and questions prepared, participates in this absence of reckoning. The visits are routine, prescriptions are renewed with slight adjustments, observations are limited to visible compliance, the polite economy of measured answers. What is sustained by laudanum is invisible to these eyes. No report is filed, no caution issued, no intervention undertaken. Dependency, if it exists, is masked by propriety, obscured by function. Society reinforces this invisibility. A mother is judged by outcomes rather than process. Children who thrive, a household that hums efficiently, a wife who fulfills social obligations, these are sufficient evidence of competence. There is no need to examine internal struggle or unspoken reliance. To question it would be to impose doubt upon appearances, a doubt society is neither willing nor prepared to entertain. The absence of public reckoning has consequences for the mother herself. Her internal labor, the constant monitoring of energy, the anticipation of need, the negotiation of relief, remains private. The success of the household depends upon her discretion, yet the recognition for that labor is absent. Satisfaction is derived not from acknowledgement, but from continued function, from the uninterrupted flow of daily life. She is praised silently through results, yet her interior experience remains invisible, unvalidated. Over years, this creates a paradoxical rhythm. Dependence is normalized internally, even as it remains invisible externally. Relief is expected and reliable, yet it is also private and morally neutralized by social perception. The mother moves through the household with grace and authority, yet each gesture is mediated by the knowledge that her endurance is unobserved, her management unrecorded. Evenings conclude as they always have. Meals cleared, children settled, household quiet. The bottle rests within reach, its purpose fulfilled without ceremony. No one questions the necessity of its presence, and no one measures the subtle debts of energy and composure it preserves. The mother's labor is continuous, sustained, and unremarked. No public reckoning emerges to challenge it, and in this quiet absence of acknowledgement, the household endures, appearances are preserved, and her secret dependence remains invisible, absolute, and uninterrupted. Opium, in the Victorian imagination, is a substance of shadowed rooms, whispered indulgence, and public scandal. The dens of London, thick with smoke and rumour, offer a theatre of excess for those who wander beyond the boundaries of propriety. Yet for the respectable mother who relies upon laudanum, opium exists without den, without notoriety, and without spectacle. Its presence is domestic, discreet, and entirely hidden within the routines of daily life. The household perceives nothing unusual. Dependence wears the guise of decorum. The bottle sits among teacups and medicinal jars, modest, unobtrusive, yet essential. The drops, measured and precise, offer relief from fatigue, tension, and pain that have accumulated over decades of care. There is no dramatic consumption, no intoxication for amusement, no public display of indulgence. The substance performs quietly, shaping the body and mind in subtle increments that escape observation while maintaining function. Relief is seamless, controlled, and entirely compatible with propriety. This invisibility is crucial. The mother's use of laudanum does not mark her as a moral failure because it is not public. There is no social narrative of excess, no gossip, no scandal to compromise reputation. She exercises her dependence entirely within private intervals, timed with precision and mediated by discipline. Every dose reinforces composure, moderates irritability, and ensures that the household runs without disruption. Her role remains intact, her virtue unquestioned. The distinction between the opium dens of rumour and the domestic use of laudanum underscores the subtlety of the dependency. In public, opium is sensationalized, feared, and moralized. In private, it is normalized, functional, and socially acceptable when administered as medicine. The mother's need is not indulgence, it is necessity. Her composure, her patience, her ability to navigate the household's demands, all rely upon it, yet no observer could perceive the chemical scaffold that underlies her performance. This arrangement shapes both perception and experience. The mother's internal world is guided by the predictable arrival of calm, yet she does not interpret her reliance as scandalous or illicit. The household interprets her behavior as natural, her composure as innate, her endurance as exemplary. Children, servants, and even the husband respond to her measured attentiveness without awareness of the chemical underpinning. Dependence exists in the quiet spaces between observation, invisible precisely because it aligns so seamlessly with expectation. The solitude of this reliance is profound. Relief is granted without public acknowledgement, and yet it is constant, reliable, and essential. The mother learns to navigate her own body with precision, anticipating tension, timing doses, monitoring fatigue. The discipline required to maintain appearances parallels, in many ways, the discipline demanded by the household itself. Each day becomes a negotiation between internal need and external expectation, with laudanum as silent arbiter. Evenings unfold predictably. The children are fed, the house settles, and she takes the drops with measured hands. Calm spreads through muscles and nerves, smoothing irritation, softening aches, and sustaining the appearance of effortless mastery. No one notes the intervention. No scandal emerges. There are no opium dens here, no public transgression, only a quiet, unremarkable routine in which chemical aid ensures survival, composure, and the uninterrupted flow of household life. In this way, laudanum operates entirely differently from the sensationalized opium of the city. Its power lies not in spectacle but in invisibility, not in excess but in moderation, not in indulgence but in necessity. It sustains the household, preserves the mother's role, and maintains appearances with a discreet authority that is invisible to all but the one who relies upon it. Dependency, like the substance itself, exists without den, without scandal, and entirely within the quiet spaces of domestic life. The bottle rests at her bedside as if it were a sentinel, quiet and unobtrusive, yet infinitely necessary. Its presence is unremarkable in appearance, small brown glass capped and labeled with professional neatness, yet its significance is profound. It is a reassurance, a mediator, a guarantor of calm that allows the household to function while shielding the mother from the cumulative toll of labor, duty, and expectation. The bottle is always within reach, a silent witness to the nights that stretch long and the moments of tension that cannot be allowed to intrude upon duty. Evenings bring the familiar rhythm. The children are settled, the house quiets, and tasks are completed. The mother moves through her preparations with precision, aware that her own body, having labored unseen through the day, demands intervention. The drops she takes are measured, neither excessive nor insufficient, administered with the deliberate care of ritual. They are both relief and insurance, a quiet acknowledgement of the physical and emotional strain she carries. The act itself is private, intimate, and profoundly solitary. There is no observer to measure the necessity of the remedy, no one to question its timing or dosage. It exists in the space between duty and self, between expectation and endurance. The household remains orderly, the children sleep, the servants attend their tasks. Nothing appears amiss. And yet, for the mother, the bottle is indispensable, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between function and fatigue, composure and internal unrest. The bedside ritual is more than chemical, it is psychological. Each measured drop signals permission, permission to relax, permission to soften, permission to allow the body and mind a moment of reprieve. The anticipation of this calm shapes her every movement in the hours leading up to it. Posture is adjusted, speech measured, actions tempered to ensure that appearances remain impeccable until the moment of relief arrives. Even thought itself is moderated, organized around the certainty of chemical assistance. Yet reliance comes with its own shadow. The mother knows in fleeting moments of awareness that the calm is contingent. Remove the bottle, and the body protests. Energy diminishes, tension returns, patience wanes. The equilibrium she maintains externally is inseparable from the discreet intervention at her bedside. Dependence is quietly absolute, yet invisible to all observers. The household sees only composure, the children notice only attentiveness, the husband perceives only competence. The cost is internal, private, and unrecorded. There is a comfort in this secrecy, even as it reinforces the dependence. The absence of judgment allows the ritual to persist without anxiety. The visible world accepts her without knowledge of the support she requires. Yet each night, as she places the bottle back on its stand, the awareness lingers. Her calm, her endurance, her virtue, all are entwined with a substance that cannot be named, questioned, or acknowledged. Time itself becomes structured around this ritual. The days unfold according to the predictable return of need, the anticipation of calm, and the administration of relief. The house continues to function smoothly, yet the unseen architecture of dependence supports it entirely. Each night, the bottle at the bedside affirms this arrangement, a quiet mediator between exhaustion and appearance, between duty and the private cost of maintaining it. And so she sleeps or rests, at least partially, her body softened, her mind calmed, while the household remains unaffected by the private negotiation that sustains it. The bottle, ordinary to the eye but essential in practice, presides silently, ensuring that the continuity of care, composure, and duty persists undisturbed, as it always has, as it always must. Death in the Victorian household is circumscribed by ritual, expectation, and propriety. It arrives inevitably, quietly, often after years of labor and endurance, and its arrival is observed with careful formality. Yet for the mother who has relied upon laudanum, death itself can come as unremarkable as life, stripped of dramatic revelation or public acknowledgement. Her passage, like her daily endurance, is contained, managed, and largely invisible, leaving the household unshaken and the world unaware of the quiet dependencies that shaped her existence. Even in her final days, the household functions. Children continue their routines, servants fulfill duties, and social obligations are maintained as best they can be. Illness, if present, is framed in the language of frailty, a pale cheek, a softened step, a quiet sigh. There is no scandal, no accusation, no alarm. What the household observes is endurance tempered by gentleness, fatigue moderated by routine, and composure maintained until the last. The mother's reliance upon laudanum has never invited notice, and even now it leaves no mark beyond the quietness of her final passage. The ritual of her final moments is similar to the rituals of her life. The drops, measured with the same care and discretion as in decades past, offer relief from pain, tension, and the weariness accumulated over a lifetime of labor. Her breathing slows, her muscles relax, and the body's persistent insistence is softened. This relief is neither dramatic nor sensational. It is measured, discreet, and entirely compatible with the expectations of propriety. The household sees calm, continuity, and dignity. Nothing more is required. Observers might remark on her serene expression, her composed demeanor, or the gentle softness in her eyes. They may interpret the signs of illness and eventual death as natural consequence, as the poetic frailty that Victorian culture has long celebrated. No one perceives the chemical scaffolding that sustained her throughout her life, nor the quiet negotiation between need and duty that shaped every gesture, every breath, every measured smile. Dependence remains invisible, yet it has governed the rhythm of her existence entirely. Even in death, the pattern of discretion persists. Pain is managed, composure is preserved, the household is uninterrupted. Visitors, if any, perceive order rather than chaos, propriety rather than collapse. The narrative of her life, careful, attentive, enduring, is mirrored in the narrative of her passing. A life concluded without scandal, without alarm, without spectacle. Her reliance, while total, leaves no evidence to challenge appearances. The lack of public reckoning is both protection and erasure. The household continues, the children adapt, the duties are fulfilled, and the external world interprets the event as a final testament to virtue, patience, and propriety. Yet the internal truth, the dependence, the negotiation, the private mediation of pain and fatigue is unrecorded, unacknowledged, invisible. What has sustained her is not celebrated. What has preserved appearances is unnoticed. In this way, death mirrors life. Both are managed, measured, and mediated to ensure that the household's functioning is uninterrupted and appearances remain intact. The laudanum that guided her endurance quietly accompanies her final passage, ensuring that the calm, the composure, and the dignity she maintained for decades persists until the last breath. A life lived in secrecy and discretion ends without scandal, preserving the invisible architecture of dependence that has governed every hour, every day, and every year. Her death, like her life, is contained, private, and unremarkable to the world. Yet it is complete, carried out with the same meticulous care, the same quiet negotiation, and the same invisible scaffolding that shaped her entire existence. The household endures, appearances remain flawless, and the secret of her reliance, hidden for decades, passes with her quietly into absence. The century watches, in its unyielding quiet, neither noticing nor condemning. It moves around the household with the same measured, indifferent rhythm that it imposes on every corner of Victorian life. The expectations of propriety, the demands of duty, the moral architecture of womanhood, all converge to create a framework in which reliance upon laudanum is not scandalous, but approved, sanctioned, and, in its way, invisible. The world sees calm, composure, and endurance, and in this, it expresses its approval, even if it never names the subtle cost. Society, in its infinite concern for appearances, values the visible signs of propriety above the private truths that lie beneath them. A mother who is patient, composed, and diligent is praised, admired, and emulated. Her fatigue is framed as delicacy, her sighs as poetry, her occasional tremor as frailty, deserving of sympathy rather than scrutiny. No one asks how calm is achieved, how patience is sustained, or what mechanisms allow composure to remain unbroken despite relentless domestic demands. Approval is granted based on result, not process. Laudanum, quiet and unassuming, operates entirely within this framework. It mediates the tensions, blunts the fatigue, softens the irritability, and maintains the outward performance that society values. Its presence is invisible, its assistance unquestioned. The world approves the outcome, never the method, and in doing so, sanctions the reliance that underpins every gesture, every measured movement, every careful smile. Dependency, though real and persistent, is never criminalized, never moralized, never recorded, because appearances are preserved. Even the household participates in this approval unwittingly. Children grow accustomed to composure as normal. Servants follow orders without questioning the energy required to issue them. The husband, confident in his own sense of order, observes function rather than strain. Each observer reinforces the notion that endurance is innate, that calm is effortless, and that propriety is inherent rather than chemically assisted. The century, through culture, social expectation, and domestic routine, codifies this silent agreement. Time itself becomes a collaborator. Decades pass, children mature, and the household's rhythm becomes self-sustaining. The rituals of laudanum, once discreetly introduced, are normalized. Relief is expected and routine. Endurance is continuous, composure is measured. The mother's reliance, profound and constant, is validated not by acknowledgement, but by the absence of reproach, by the quiet affirmation of society that her functioning, her patience, and her calm are the hallmarks of virtue. Yet this approval is paradoxical. The world values composure, yet ignores the cost. The society that praises patience and diligence does not account for the invisible labor, the quiet negotiation, the chemical scaffolding that ensures the household continues undisturbed. What is celebrated is not the endurance itself, but the appearance of it, and in this, the century quietly sanctions what it does not see. In her final days, as the household remains orderly and her reliance unobserved, the mother embodies this paradox entirely. Her calm, her competence, her virtue are recognized, applauded in their results, yet the true architecture of her endurance remains invisible. The century has approved it, sanctioned it, and moved on without notice, just as it did for countless others who carried similar burdens in silence. Thus, the century that observes propriety above all else permits what it cannot name, approves what it cannot measure, and preserves appearances above reality. Laudanum, discretion, and duty converge to sustain a life lived entirely in expectation, moderation, and unseen reliance. The mother's calm, painstakingly maintained through decades of quiet labor, persists until the end, and in that endurance, the century grants its quietest, most complete approval, unremarked, unquestioned, and absolute.